Welcome back to Potter Read. Today's adventure. Harry's accidental magic unsealed Merlin's tomb at age 7 and the old wizard chose him as successor. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The door that knew his name. Number 4, Privet Drive, was a house that had achieved, through long discipline and a ferocious quantity of will, a state of perfect ordinariness so total that it bordered upon the supernatural. Its lawn was clipped to the precise length favored by men who suspect their neighbors of plotting against them. Its windows were washed until they forgot they had ever been glass. Its hedges stood at attention like soldiers who have been told that imagination is a punishable offense and who believe it, and who have informed on hedges that disagreed. Into this fortress of the unremarkable, governed by a man whose neck had long ago abandoned all distinction from his shoulders, and a woman whose chief accomplishment was the surveillance of other people's curtains, the universe had, with the sly cruelty it reserves for its very favorite jokes, deposited a child who was anything but he slept in the cupboard under the stairs. This is the kind of fact that wishes to be made into a tragedy, and it was one, but tragedies in that house were not permitted to raise their voices, lest they wake Dudley. The cupboard smelled of dust and floor polish and the particular green sourness of a mop that is never quite allowed to dry, and Harry Potter, who had been 7 years old for not quite a fortnight, had catalogued every nail in its low ceiling the way other children learn the constellations. There were 9. The longest of them had a head bent into the shape of a question, and on nights when the house above him groaned beneath the weight of 3 people who had eaten very well indeed, he held long conversations with it, because a person must speak to something, and the spiders, though attentive, did not reply. Morning in that house arrived not as a light, but as a list of demands. Vernon Dursley descended the stairs at 7 precisely, each tread delivering a small and personal earthquake to the ceiling of the cupboard, and the day began the way all the days began, with a voice like a slammed drawer announcing that it was time, that it was past time, that someone had better be attending to the bacon before that someone was given a reason to lament the slowness of the bacon. Harry was already awake. He was always already awake. He had learned, by the patient tutelage of consequence, that to be asleep when summoned was a crime in that household roughly equivalent to setting fire to the church, and he had no wish to stand trial for it, so he attended to the bacon. He turned each rasher at the exact instant it began to curl, and he did not let it catch, because burned bacon was a sermon that ran from breakfast clear through lunch, and he laid it before his cousin Dudley, who received it in the manner of a small emperor accepting tribute he has already decided is insufficient. Dudley was a child built along the architectural principles of a beanbag chair, and he had lately made the discovery that the world contained things he could not have the instant he wished them, a discovery he regarded as a personal affront delivered by a hostile cosmos with nothing better to do. This particular morning the affront was that Harry had been given a single rasher to eat standing up at the counter, and Dudley wanted it. Not because he was hungry. Dudley existed in a condition of perpetual eating, against which actual hunger could make no headway. He wanted it because Harry had it, and the possession of anything whatsoever by Harry was, in the cosmology of that house, a heresy that demanded correction. "He's looking at my bacon," Dudley reported, with the grave civic seriousness of a man informing on his neighbors. "Am not," said Harry, who had in fact been looking at the wall, where a hairline crack ran from the light switch to the corner, and had, across the long years of his attention, come to resemble a river with a single tributary. He had given the river a name. He had told the name to no one. There are things a person keeps even when he has been left nothing else, and a child who privately owns a river is not, whatever the household ledger may record, entirely without property. It is worth pausing here to record, for the sake of the wizards who would one day sift Harry Potter's childhood for omens, the way augurs once sifted the entrails of birds, that the cracks in the paint kept a particular weakness for the schoolyard. There was the celebrated afternoon of Mrs. Wilkins's wig, which had been a sober and respectable gray at the start of the lesson, and a vivid electric blue by the middle of it, an event for which Harry was kept behind, despite the patent impossibility of any culpable mechanism, on the principle that strange things befell him and somebody had to be inconvenienced for it. There was the matter of the vanishing greenhouse glass, and the matter of the sum at the board, which Harry had solved correctly to the visible irritation of a teacher who had hoped to make a public example of him, that being precisely the variety of cleverness that purchased a child a longer and lonelier walk home. So Harry had taught himself a more useful arithmetic than any on the school's curriculum, the arithmetic of how much to know where other people could see it and how much to keep. He kept a great deal. He kept it in the cupboard with the bent nail and the secret river, where no inspector ever came to count it, and he wondered about the cracks more than a child should be left alone to wonder about anything. He turned the question over in the dark much as he turned the rashers in the pan, watching for the moment it might begin to curl into sense. Why did the strange things come only when he was cornered, or shamed, or pressed flat against the wall of some impossible morning? Why would they never come when he begged them to, lying very still and willing the cupboard door to slide its own bolt, which it never once did? He had arrived, by the patient method of a clever child with nothing better to do, at a private theory, which was that the strangeness was not his to command, that it was more in the nature of a tide than a tool, and that whatever moved it lived somewhere he had not yet learned the road to. He was, the chronicler must record with some admiration, very nearly right. He was merely 1,000 years and one buried stare short of the whole of it. Aunt Petunia did not turn from the window, where 2 doors down a removal van had committed the impertinence of arriving without prior announcement to the street. "Eat in the garden," she said to Harry, in the tone she kept for the disposal of rubbish, "before you put Diddy off his food." And so the morning arranged itself as the mornings always arranged themselves, with Harry exiled to the outdoors and the Dursleys consigned, as a mercy or a sentence, to one another's company. And had you stopped any soul on Privet Drive that day and inquired whether anything strange might reasonably be expected of that house, of that street, of that flat and well-mannered morning, they would have laughed at you, and then watched you all the way to the corner to be certain you had truly gone. Here the chronicler is obliged to confess a thing, and the thing is this: the ordinary world is a very thin coat of paint. It is applied with enormous labor over a surface that does not, in its secret heart, wish to be ordinary at all, and it cracks. It always cracks. It had been cracking, quietly and deniably, around Harry Potter for the whole of his 7 years, in precisely the small ways that grown people are so marvelously gifted at not seeing. Hair shorn to the scalp on a Sunday stood full and dark again by Monday, to his aunt's tight white silence, which she broke only to lay the blame upon a faulty pair of scissors. A loathsome brown jumper, advancing upon his head like a woolen tide, shrank and shrank in its descent until it would not have fitted a hand puppet, and no living person could account for it. Once fleeing across the schoolyard, he arrived upon the roof of the kitchens by an act of pure animal arithmetic, his body solving in a heartbeat a problem his mind had not yet finished stating, which was the problem of being beneath one's pursuers when it would so plainly be better to be above them. The teachers determined that he had climbed. Harry had determined nothing. That was the whole trouble with the cracks. They came upon him while he was looking elsewhere, conjured by feelings too large for the 7-year-old who was made to hold them, and they offered him no comfort whatever, because he could not take the credit for them. A power that you cannot claim is not a gift. It is a stranger who has moved into your skin and declines to give an account of himself. He was scraping the last of the salt from the creases of his fingers, at the side of the house where the kitchen window could not quite reach him, when he heard the sound that would go on to organize the remainder of his life, though neither he nor the sound itself had the smallest inkling of it yet. It was laughter, not the good kind. There exists a whole species of laughter that contains nothing of mirth, that has evolved for a single purpose, which is to inform a chosen victim that the hunt has opened, and Dudley Dursley had assembled around himself a small and faithful congregation of believers in that gospel. There was Piers Palkis, thin where Dudley was broad, and therefore appointed to the running. There were Malcolm and Gordon and Dennis, interchangeable as cutlery, and they came around the corner of the house with the loose, grinning assurance of children who have never once been told no by anyone whose opinion they were required to weigh. "There he is," said Piers, in the manner of a man observing that the fish are at last biting. Harry was already moving. Let it be understood that this was not cowardice. Cowardice asks for a decision, and Harry had made this decision so many hundreds of times that it had ceased to be a decision at all, and become a reflex, like the blink, like the flinch from a raised hand. He went over the low fence at the side and out into the alley that ran behind the gardens, and the recreation that the Dursley household called, with the artless candor of children who have not yet learned to dress up their appetites, Harry hunting, came baying after him with the slap of trainers on tarmac. He was fast. It was the one wealth no one had thought to confiscate. A diet of leftovers and the leavings of plates had built him lame, and the long apprenticeship of needing to be elsewhere had built him quick, and he spent the quickness now without stinting it. Down the alley, across the wisteria walk, through the narrow gap in the carbone's hedge that he alone among the local children was slight enough to use. Behind him the gang spilled around the long way, hooting, and for a few bright seconds Harry ran entirely alone, the morning sun coming sideways and golden through the gardens, a blackbird scolding from a television aerial, the world for one breath his own. He might have got clean away, as he had got clean away 100 times before, to spend the long hot day in the cool dim sanctuary of the public library, where the woman at the desk kept a standing arrangement with herself to overlook the fact that he had never once produced a card. The chase, to its participants, was a glorious thing, and to Harry it was a geometry problem with consequences. He knew the estate the way a hunted animal knows its wood, every gap and ginnel and low wall of it, and he solved it as he ran. The Palkis boy was quick but turned wide on his corners. Dudley could not corner at all, and so the whole trick was always to corner, to make the run a thing of angles rather than of straight lines, and Harry cut left where Piers expected right and went over the number 11 wall where a less desperate child would have gone around, and for a moment he had a clear 40 yards and the whole bright morning in front of him. Then a milk float of all the agents the universe might have selected for the office rounded the corner of the close at its stately processional pace, and Harry checked and lost a stride and lost two, and the 40 yards became 30 and 20, and Piers's hand closed on the air a finger's width behind his collar and missed. That miss, that single hand's breadth of grace, decided which way Harry would turn at the junction, and so it decided, although not one soul present could have known it, a very great deal more besides. He might have got away. The chronicler would dearly love to report that he did. But the universe, which had been lying in wait beneath the thin paint of Privet Drive for 7 uncomplaining years, had finished with waiting, and it reached out and nudged Harry's feet, ever so gently, the way a patient master nudges a pawn toward the one square upon which it will at last decide the game. And at the next junction Harry turned not toward the high street and the library and the long bright safety of the afternoon, but toward the single place in all of Little Winging that every child knew by heart and no child would enter. They called it the Old Hollow. It crouched at the frayed edge of the estate, where the obedient houses lost their nerve and surrendered to a wide tract of waste ground that the council had been meaning to develop since before Harry was born, and would go on meaning to develop with the profound and inexhaustible sincerity of councils, until the sun itself burned down to a cinder. A chain-link fence ringed it, gone to orange rust and bellied outward in a dozen places where successive generations of dares had tested its resolve. Beyond the fence the ground swelled into a low green mound, too perfectly round to be the work of weather and too old to live in anybody's memory, and crowned upon its summit by a single hawthorn that had been struck by lightning at some unrecorded hour of the past, and had survived, blackened and wrung and contorted, in flat defiance of every law of botany and good manners. Dogs would not go near it. This was held among the children of the estate to be a circumstance of enormous and unspoken significance, although not one of them could have told you why, and their parents, pressed upon the point, offered only that the place was dangerous, that there were old wells beneath it, that a child had fallen there once long ago and was never the same after, and then changed the subject with the brisk finality of people repeating a warning they had received intact and never once understood. Harry had never set foot inside it. He was a careful child, made careful by a life in which carelessness was a luxury he had never been able to afford, and the Old Hollow had always struck him, on his hurried passages by, as a place that was holding its breath. But the fence had a gap where the wire had been peeled back into a rusted iron mouth, and the gang was very close now, near enough that he could hear Dudley's wet-labored panting and Piers's high-carrying whoop, and a creature that is hunted does not pause to consult its philosophy. It bolts for the dark on the reasonable theory that the dark might consent to hide it, and Harry bolted for the dark. He went through the gap. A barb plucked at his sleeve and let it go again with a sound that was almost an apology, and then he was inside the fence, out upon the waste ground proper, the long grass dragging at his ankles and the mound lifting before him, larger now that he stood within the ring than it had ever appeared from the road. Some things grow smaller with distance and grow distant up close. Behind him the chain link rang and shivered as the pursuit reached it, and then there came a pause, a long and curious pause in which Harry understood without turning that they did not want to follow him in. "He's gone in the hollow," said Gordon, and his voice had changed. "So," said Dudley, but there was a question folded up small inside the word. "My mum says your mum's a," and here Dudley pronounced a word his mother would have scrubbed from any mouth in England but his own, and the brittle spell of hesitation cracked, and they came through the gap one after another, and the hunt resumed itself upon ground that no one had walked in living memory. So Harry climbed. There was nowhere else on offer. The mound was the center and the meaning of the place, and the fence ringed in all the rest, and so he went up, his hands buried in the cold, wet grass, the smell of crushed green and turned earth flooding the whole of his head, and at the very top, beneath the lightning-murdered hawthorn, he turned, because there was nothing left in the world to do but turn, and he faced them. They labored up the slope in a ragged line, blowing hard, Dudley last of all and reddest. 5 of them and one of him, and the one of him stood with his spine against a dead tree upon a mound that even dogs declined to climb, and the morning, which had been so frank and bright a moment before, had gone strange about its edges, the light grown thick and yellow in the way it goes thick and yellow before a storm that the weather has neglected to announce. A pressure had entered the air that owed nothing to the chase. The hawthorn's charred branches did not stir, and yet the grass beneath them bowed and rippled in a wind that Harry could not feel upon his skin. He marked this the way one marks, deep inside a dream, the moment when the rules go quietly different without ever being able to name the hour of it. "Nowhere left to run," said Piers, grinning. "Leave me alone." It came out of Harry smaller than he had wanted, and that was the everlasting trouble. It always came out smaller than he wanted. The whole of him was forever smaller than he wanted. 7 years in a cupboard and a single secret river set against the vast, soft, indifferent weight of a world that had made up its mind, long before he could lodge an objection, that he did not signify. Dudley grinned and cracked his knuckles, a gesture he had studied on television and rehearsed before the bathroom mirror, and he took a step, and the gang took its step with him as a single animal, and Harry pressed back against the tree until the dead bark bit through his shirt and into his shoulder blades. And something within him, some old and overfilled vessel that had been silently taking on the cold water of these mornings for the whole of 7 years, simply and at last gave way. What followed, the wizards who would spend the remainder of their natural lives arguing over it, in paneled offices and over warm goblets and within the cold marble galleries of those whose profession is the keeping of secrets, were never able to agree upon, for the excellent reason that not one of them had been present. And the only witnesses were 5 children whose testimony was wrecked beyond recovery, and one very great wizard who had not, as yet, recovered the use of his voice. But the chronicler was present in the manner that chroniclers are always and inconveniently present, and the chronicler will tell you the truth of it. It did not burst out of Harry like a blow. That is the cheap account, the account for those who imagine that power is only ever a fist. It went out of him the way a long-held breath goes out, the way a knot comes undone all at once when you have at last stopped fighting it, the way the chord at the end of a piece of music resolves the whole of the ache that came before, so that you feel it in the chest a half-second before the ear can catch it. The pressure that had crowded the air rushed inward instead of outward, toward him, toward the cornered point of him under the dead tree, and it gathered there, and the whole world held entirely still, and then it went down, into the mound, into the deep old patient earth. Down through Harry, who stood upon the crown of the old hollow, with the salt of his breakfast still in the creases of his hands, the way a key goes home into a lock that has spent 1,000 years waiting for exactly that shape, and no other under heaven. The hawthorn bloomed into silver fire that gave off no heat at all. Dudley's gang, to their lasting credit and their lifelong nightmares, ran. They went down the slope and through the rusted mouth in the fence and did not stop running, and Dudley would wet his bed for a month and lay the blame, with great conviction, upon the cat. Harry did not run because Harry could not, because the ground beneath the worn soles of his trainers had begun, with a sound like the entire earth clearing its ancient throat, to open. It did not fall in. A collapse is an accident, and this was nothing of the kind. This was an unfolding. The turf split along seams that had been there always and that no eye had ever found, lines geometric and deliberate and burning at their edges with the same cold silver as the tree, and the two halves of the mound's green crown drew slowly back from one another in the way the heavy covers of a great book are opened by hands that know its value. Beneath was no soil, beneath was a stair. It was wrought of some black and glassy substance that took the silver light into itself and kept it down in its depths, so that each step appeared to hold a whole night sky folded inside it, and the stair wound down in a slow, deliberate spiral into the body of the hill, into a darkness that was not in the least empty, that hummed faintly far below, with the steady patience of a thing that has been counting for a very long time, and is now near at last to the end of its count. Cold air rose up out of the opening, dry and clean and smelling of stone, and of something underneath the stone for which Harry possessed no word at all and would spend years afterward trying to find one. The smell of a place where time itself has been laid down and kept, the way other men keep wine. Harry stood at the lip of it. Behind him, the fence still sang faintly with the passage of the fled. Above him, the hawthorn burned on without consuming so much as a twig of itself, casting his shadow long and thin across the parted earth. Below him the dark went on waiting, and it had about it a quality the dark of the cupboard had never owned, a quality he could not have explained to a living person and did not try. It was waiting for him, not for a trespasser, not for a thief, not for anyone at all who might happen by. The cupboard had only ever been the place where he was put. This was the place where he was expected. A sensible child would have run. Harry had been a sensible child for the whole of his 7 years, and being sensible had purchased him a cupboard, a secret river, and the dignity of eating bacon against a wall. He looked back once over his shoulder at the gap in the fence and the broad ordinary morning that lay beyond it, the morning that belonged to Privet Drive and the removal van and his aunt's perpetually twitching curtains, the whole enormous and tireless machine of the ordinary that had labored for 7 years to explain to him, patiently and without any particular malice, that he amounted to nothing. Then he turned and looked down into the dark that had opened for him and for no one else, that had broken across the patient faces of queens and conquerors and grasping hands for 1,000 turning years, and refused them every one, and had now at last, for a hunted child with breakfast salt on his fingers and a hole in the toe of one sock, consented to break its silence. He went down. The daylight at his back closed by degrees, not slammed shut but withdrawn, the way a parent draws a door to behind a sleeping child, and with each turn of the stair the upper world grew thinner in his memory, privet drive and the milk float, and the whole long catalogue of his small humiliations receding into something he had read about once and half forgotten. What rose to take their place had no name he owned. It had only a direction which was down, and a temperature which was cold, and a patience which was older than the hill. The stair turned beneath him, smooth and faintly warm where it had no business being warm, and with every step the daylight at his back dwindled and the silver glow strengthened, for the seams of light did not remain above. They ran down into the depths beside him, threaded through the black glass walls like veins of frozen lightning, so that he made his descent through a cathedral of cold fire. The black glass beneath his feet was not, he discovered, entirely faithful in its reflections. When he glanced down he saw himself thrown back at him, a thin pale smudge of a child descending, but he saw other things too, deeper in the glass, where his own reflection had no business reaching. He saw once a procession of figures climbing the same stair in the opposite direction, robed and crowned and very tall, going up and up out of the deep with grave, unhurried steps, and not one of them turned a head toward him, and when he looked again they were gone and there was only the pale smudge of himself. He saw another time, far down inside a single step, a flake of white fire turning slowly over, like a coal that would not consent to go out. He stopped looking down after that. There is a kind of looking that invites a thing to look back, and Harry, who had spent 7 years learning how not to be noticed, recognized it the instant he felt it. He counted the steps instead, because counting was the thing he did when there was nothing else left to hold on to. He counted the 9 nails of the cupboard ceiling, and the rashers left in a packet, and the seconds of a silence to learn which kind of silence it was, and he had counted to 33 when the stair gave out beneath him onto a level floor, and there he stopped counting, because counting was of no use whatever against the thing that lay before him. It was a hall. The word is far too small, and the chronicler offers it the way one might offer a thimble to a man set the task of bailing out the sea. It was a hall the size of a cathedral in the precise shape of a held breath, and it had been carved or grown or perhaps sung out of the same black glass as the stair, and by every law that governs caves and cellars and the whole vast underneath of the world it ought to have been pitch dark, and it was not. Light lived in it. The light issued from nowhere and from everywhere at once. It pooled in the open air at about the height of a tall man's brow and hung there in slow drifting motes, like the dust suspended in a sunbeam that has long since forgotten there was ever a sun, and where it brushed against the walls it woke them, and the walls were very far from blank. They were carved. Harry walked out into the hall on legs that had stopped consulting him on the matter, and the carvings moved along with him, rank upon rank, story upon story, climbing the high walls up into the deep gloom of a vault he could not see the top of. There were stags whose antlers branched like winter forests against a carved and frozen sky. There were wolves that ran beneath a moon some long-dead hand had cut so cunningly that it seemed to swell and wane as he passed beneath it. There were towers and the falling of towers. There were figures that knelt and figures that wore crowns and figures that had laid their crowns down upon the ground. And there was, along one low panel that he halted before and could not for his life have said why, a single standing figure at the mouth of a cave, a star caught and blazing in one upraised hand, and a great formless dark pressed close against the light of it, straining, hungering, held back by the merest margin. The carving had grown so old that its edges had gone soft, the way the face of a coin goes soft after 100,000 pockets, and yet it was so alive beneath that softness that Harry lifted his hand toward the carved star without ever deciding to, and stopped with his fingertips a single breath from the cold stone, because something far older than his 7 years rose up in him to whisper that this was not a place in which one touched things idly. Other wonders kept the hall, and they did not all of them keep still. At its center, where the carved walls drew back into a wide open floor, there stood a basin of the pale shell-colored metal upon a plinth of black glass, and out of the basin rose, without any sound at all, a slow fountain of light, climbing and falling and climbing again, shaped like water and behaving like fire, and casting up onto the high vault a shifting net of brightness in which Harry, craning until his neck ached, believed he could make out the slow turning of stars he had never once seen from any window in Surrey. Along the near wall stood a row of suits of armor, or what wore the shape of armor, very tall and very old, the metal of them gone to the dull green of a long sleep, and as Harry passed before them the empty visors turned, each in its turn by no more than a hair, the way a sleeping man turns his face toward a voice he half hears in a dream. He did not pause to look at them twice. There was a hearth as broad as the Dursleys' sitting room set into one wall, cold and swept and laid with white logs that had never been burned in wood. He somehow understood, never burn until the right hand kindled them. And above the hearth, in the place a mantel clock would keep, there hung a great wheel of dim brass set round with 12 unlit lamps, and as he watched, the first of the 12 woke and glowed, gold and faint, and then was still, and he could not have said what it had counted, only that something somewhere had begun. There were words as well. They ran in long bands beneath the carvings, in letters he had never been taught, angular here and flowing there by turns, and as he passed along them, the silver light gathered itself into their grooves and ran along their length, left to right, in exactly the way the reading eye runs, so that the wall appeared to be reading itself aloud in a language of moving light to an audience of one small trespasser in odd socks. He could not understand a single word of it. And yet, walking beneath that running brightness, he was visited by the strangest certainty, the kind that arrives entire and refuses to be argued back out of the room, that the words were about him. Not about a Harry, not about a Potter. The words were 1,000 years older than ever his name had been, but about the shape of him, about the thing in him that had unlocked the door. The hall narrowed as it ran, drawing him onward, until the carved walls closed in near on either hand, and the drifting light gathered ahead of him into a hanging curtain of pale gold, and through that curtain Harry came at last to the door. He knew it for the door in the way that a person knows, on waking, which of the night's dreams had been the true one. Everything in the hall had been a long argument leading toward it, every stag and wolf and toppling tower a clause in a case whose entire conclusion was this single span of metal set into the black glass wall. It stood taller than the front door of number 4, taller than Uncle Vernon's car was long, round at its top, and it was made of a metal that was not gold and was not silver and was not anything that Harry could put a name to, a metal the soft pale color of the inside of a shell that caught the hall's light and turned it slowly through hues that likewise had no names. There was no handle upon it, there was no keyhole. There was, set in the very center of it at the exact height of Harry's eyes, one carved shape and no other, and the shape was a hand. Open, palm outward, held up in the gesture that says stop, or that says wait, or that says, most ancient of all, I have nothing, you see, I am not armed. Around the rim of the door, where in a church there might have run the names of the dead, there ran instead a single line of the angular letters, and as Harry's eye fell upon them the light woke and traveled the carving, and this time, although the words kept to their unknown tongue, their meaning arrived in him whole, the way the meaning of a slammed door arrives whole in a child who was never taught the grammar of slamming. Not by power, said the door, not by blood, nor cunning, nor the long labor of the wise. He stood beneath the line and understood, in the wordless way, that it was a list of everything that had ever been tried against it. He thought of the carved figures going up the stair, crowned and robed and very tall, and he thought that perhaps they had all of them stood here once before the same hand held up in stone, and had reached for it with hands that wanted, and had been turned away into the dark to climb back up forever. He had wanted things in his life. He had wanted, with a wanting that ached in the teeth, a great many things he was never going to have, but he had not come down the stair to want anything. He had come down the stair because there had been 5 of them and one of him, and the dark had offered to hide him, and that the chronicler suspects has always made all the difference there is. And there was a voice in the hall, although no one at all had spoken. It did not come from the door, it did not come from the carved walls. It came up out of the place behind the wall in the same manner that the dark at the foot of the stair had come from everywhere at once, and it was not loud and it was not unkind, and it spoke inside his skull and in the cold air together in a tongue he had never in his life heard and understood completely, the way one understands the weather without ever being taught. Who comes? Said the voice to the door that is not opened. Harry's mouth had gone dry as the stone. He looked at the carved open hand. He looked down then at his own 2 hands, scraped raw from the climb, the breakfast salt still lodged in their creases, the hands of a child who owned nothing in the world and carried no weapon in it, and a thought came to him that he did not understand in the slightest and would not understand for years yet to come, which was that the door was not asking him for his name. The door already knew about names. It had heard 1,000 of them pronounced before it with swagger or with cunning or with naked want, and it had turned every one of them away into the dark. It was asking for something else, something no name had ever been able to answer, and the only thing Harry had to set before it was the truth, because the truth was the only thing he had ever had, and so the truth was what he gave it. I'm not anybody, said Harry Potter to the door beneath the hill. I was only running away. For the length of a held breath the whole hall stood in silence, the deep and total silence of the bottom of the world. And then the door, which had refused queens, which had broken conquerors across its patient face, which had turned away 1,000 years of grasping hands, and waited so long in the dark that the men who raised it were dust and the dust of them forgotten, began, with a sound like distant bells rung under water, to open. The light that came through was neither silver nor gold. It was white, the white that is every color held at once, the white of the star in the carved man's lifted hand, and it fell across Harry's upturned face and made him narrow his eyes and did not hurt them in the least. And out of the heart of that brightness, out of the radiance that had slept beneath the soft green hills of Surrey, while whole empires climbed and burned and were quietly paved over by the council, something old and vast and entirely awake turned its attention slowly, the way the sun turns and the way the sea turns, upon a 7-year-old in a torn shirt and one sock who had arrived at the door with nothing at all in his hands, and had for precisely that reason been let in. A new voice spoke out of the light. It was not the voice of the door, it was warmer than that voice, and it was older, and beneath its enormous and unhurried calm it was, faintly and unmistakably, amused. 1,000 years, said the voice, and they send me a child who has lost his shoes. Harry looked down at his feet. Somewhere upon the long turning stair, and without once noticing the loss, he had indeed mislaid a shoe. I didn't lose it, he said, because even at the bottom of the world, with the light of a sleeping legend full upon his face and his pulse going like a sparrow against the cage of his ribs, a child will defend himself against a charge he considers unjust. It came off, and the light, against all the odds the chronicler can muster, laughed. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The last enchantment. The light did not fade so much as it decided to be looked at, gathering itself out of the white blaze into shapes a child's eye could bear, the way the glare of a window resolves when you have stopped wincing into a frame and a sill in a particular gray afternoon. What it resolved into was an old man seated in a chair, and the chair was the strangest thing in a hall that had been competing all evening for the title. It had grown rather than been built. Roots of pale wood, the wood of no tree that walks the green earth now, came up through the black glass floor and wove themselves into a high seat and a tall arched back, and through the wood ran threads of the same cold silver that veined the walls, pulsing slowly, the way a vein pulses in a sleeping wrist. In the chair sat the old man, and he was made of light and was somehow also entirely solid, both at once, the question of which never quite resolving, so that to look at him directly was to feel the small headache of trying to see a word that means two opposite things. He wore robes the deep blue of the sky an hour after the last of the sun, sewn over with points of brightness that were not embroidery, because they moved, slow constellations migrating across the cloth on errands of their own. His beard was white and very long and tucked, with an old man's practicality, into a belt of plain rope. His face was a country of lines, every one of them carved by some particular century, and his eyes, when they opened, were the precise dark of the bottom step of the stair, the dark that held a sky. Harry stood where the door had let him stand, one shoe gone, salt in the creases of his hands, and looked at the old man, and the old man looked back, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. A clock somewhere that was not a clock counted the silence in soft brass tones. "Sit," said the old man at last, and a second chair rose out of the floor beside Harry, smaller, plainer, sized for exactly the child that Harry was and not an inch larger, which is the kind of courtesy that a person notices when no one has ever paid it to him before. Harry did not sit. A child raised in a house where every kindness was a trap learns to inspect the gift before he takes it, and he stayed standing, his back not quite to the open door, and asked the question that was first in the queue. "Am I in trouble?" The old man considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "That," he said, "is the most sensible thing anyone has said in this hall in 900 years, and you should know that the competition included 3 kings, a queen who later ate a country, and a wizard so clever he forgot how to flinch, which is the last thing a clever man should forget. No, you are not in trouble. You are, if anything, the opposite of trouble, though we have not yet a word for that, and I have been here long enough to have wanted one. Are you a ghost? A ghost?" The old man tasted the word. A ghost is the smudge a person leaves on the air when he will not go on, a stain of refusal, the imprint of someone who would not pass through the last door and so stands forever in the draft of it. No, I am not a ghost. I went through my door a very long time ago willingly, and shut it behind me, which is the only dignified way to do the thing. A point of light detached itself from his sleeve and drifted up toward the dark vault and went out. What you are looking at is closer to a letter. A very long letter, written by a man to a person he had never met, sealed in the one envelope that could not be steamed open, and left in the dark to wait until the right hand broke the seal. You broke the seal, so you are reading me. Sit down and read, child. My penmanship is execrable, and the hour is later than either of us thinks. Harry sat down. The chair held him the way a hand cupped under the elbow holds a person who has not slept, and the holding undid something in his shoulders that had been wound tight for so long he had stopped feeling it as tightness and started feeling it as the shape of himself. "What's your name?" he said. "Ah." The old man folded his long hands in his lap, and the constellations on his robe slowed, gathering, the chronicler suspects, for an entrance. "Now there is a question with a history. I have had a great many names, because a man who lives long enough is renamed by everyone who needs him to be something. The Druids called me one thing and the Romans another, and the monks who came after, with their good ink and their bad memories, called me a third, and twisted the third into a story with a sword in it and a boy king and a great deal of weeping, most of which is wrong, though the weeping is accurate. But the name they settled on, the name that outlived the rest as a single coin outlives whoever minted it, was Merlin. The word landed in the hall and lay there. Harry knew the name. Of course he knew the name. Even a child kept in a cupboard had seen the cartoon, the one with the absent-minded wizard and the talking owl and the sword that came out of the stone, watched in stolen glimpses through the gap of a door before he was sent away from the warm room. He had thought it was a made-up thing, the way the moon landing was a real thing and dragons were a made-up thing, and he held those two boxes very firmly apart, because keeping things in the right boxes was one of the few powers a careful child could be sure of. The box marked made up developed at that moment a serious crack. "You're not real," Harry said, which was less an insult than a hope, because if Merlin was not real then Harry was asleep against a dead tree on the old hollow and would wake up sore and ordinary, whatever its faults, had rules he had learned. "I am the realest thing you have met all day," said Merlin, not unkindly, "and I will thank you to keep your disbelief about your person, where it will do you a great deal of good in the years ahead and no harm at all down here. The world is going to spend a quantity of effort very shortly telling you what is real. Most of them will be lying, and the cruelest ones will be lying to themselves first, which makes them sincere, which makes them dangerous. You came down a stair into the underneath of a hill, and a dead man made of light is calling you by no name yet and inviting you to argue with him about whether he exists. Trust your feet. Your feet brought you here. Your feet have better sense than the whole Wisengamot, and they are presently wearing one sock." Harry looked at his sock. Then, because the chair was kind and the old man had not once raised his voice and the day had been very long, he asked the question that mattered most, the one he had carried down all 33 steps without daring to look at it directly. "Why did the door open for me?" It said, "Not by power. I haven't got any power. I'm just—" He stopped. He had been about to say a word about himself, a small flat word the Dursleys used, and he found in this hall that he did not want to give it to the heir because the heir here seemed to keep things. Merlin's dark eyes rested on him, and the amusement that had laughed at the lost shoe went out of them, and what came into their place was something older and more careful. The look of a man examining a coin he has been told is a forgery and finding, against all his experience, that it rings true. "That," said Merlin, "is the lesson, and you have walked into the middle of it, which is the only place a lesson worth knowing can be entered. Listen. I built that door," Merlin went on, "in the last bad year when my hands had begun to shake and the thing I had spent my life holding shut had begun, very quietly, to test the hinges. I built it to keep out exactly the sort of person who would most want to come in. Do you understand the difficulty in that? Every lock that has ever been made can be opened by the right key, and the right key is a thing, and a thing can be stolen or copied or pried from a dead hand, and I have known men who would dig up a saint to get at the ring on his finger. I did not want a lock that answered to a thing. I wanted a lock that answered to a state of the soul, and the state I chose was the one no thief, no king, no hungry clever man can counterfeit, because the very wanting of what is behind the door is the proof that you may not have it. The door opens to need without greed. It opens to the hand held out empty. It opens to the hunted, and never, not once in 1,000 years, to the hunter. Lots of people must have tried," said Harry. "Lots of people." Merlin's mouth moved under the beard. "Children, you have a gift for the kindly understatement. Let me tell you about the people who tried. There was a Saxon king who came with an army and a captive bishop, thinking holiness was a key he could carry in chains. The door did not so much as warm to him. There was a Norman who came with gold enough to buy a duchy, and offered it, all of it, to the empty hall, and the hall took none, because you cannot bribe a door that wants nothing. There was a witch of the high cold north who came alone, which was clever, and came humble, which was clever, and stood before the hand for a year and a day pretending she did not want what lay behind it. And the door, child, the door is not fooled by performances of humility. It reads the wanting under the words the way you read the silence under your aunt's voice. It sent her away. They all went away. Some of them I watched go from in here, from the dark, and I will tell you a thing I have told no one, which is easy, as I have had no one to tell. There were nights I nearly opened it myself from pity, because the trying breaks them, and a broken great person is a terrible thing to watch. I did not. The door was wiser than my pity. You cannot give this to a person who comes to take it. You can only give it to a person who came for something else entirely and tripped over it in the dark." Harry sat very still. "I came because Dudley was going to hit me," he said. "That's all. I wasn't being good. I was just trying not to get hit." "I know," said Merlin gently. "That is precisely why the door loves you. You did not climb down here to become great. You climbed down here because the up was full of fists, greatness that is reached for curdles in the hand, greatness that is fallen into while fleeing something worse has a chance, just a chance, of staying sweet. The door is not rewarding your goodness, child. You are 7, your goodness is a sapling, and the weather is coming. The door is recognizing your emptiness, the particular shape of a hand that has never been allowed to hold anything and has therefore never learned to grab. That emptiness is the rarest key in the world and the cruelest gift, and I am about to make it crueler, and I am sorry for it, and I am going to do it anyway, because the alternative is worse than any cruelty I can manage." "What alternative?" "In time," said Merlin. "First, a test, not of your power. You have not got any, as you correctly observe, only a great untrained tide, and a tide is not a power any more than a flood is a plan. A test of your seeing. Stand up." Harry stood. Merlin lifted one hand, and the silver in the roots brightened, and a section of the black glass floor between them clouded over like breath on a cold pane and then cleared, and where it cleared there was a table, and on the table there were 3 cups, plain and identical, upturned, the dull pewter of old spoons. "Under one of these cups," said Merlin, "is a stone. A common pebble, I am not a conjurer, whatever the monks wrote. I am going to move the cup slowly with my old hands, no faster than your eye can follow, and you are going to tell me at the end which cup hides the stone. There is no trick of magic in it, there is only attention. The whole of what I have to teach you, the whole of the lost art they will tell you is gone from the world, begins here in the difference between a child who watches the cups and a child who watches the hands. Are you ready? That's it. Harry had played this game once at a fair. He had been taken to by accident and abandoned at on purpose, and he had watched a man fleece a crowd at it, and he had worked out, standing small at the back, that the trickster's hands lied and the cups told the truth, and that the only way to win was to refuse all interest in the part the trickster wanted you interested in. You move them slowly, Merlin agreed. Insultingly slowly, a snail would lose patience, and he moved them. He moved them slowly, exactly as promised, his pale fingers sliding the cups across the glass in long looping passes, and the silver light flared and chimed each time a cup was lifted, a bright distracting music, and the constellations on his robe wheeled, and a low voice that was not quite a voice murmured numbers in a tongue Harry did not know, and the cups gleamed and turned and crossed and recrossed. And Harry, who had been abandoned at a fair, and had learned at that fair the single most useful thing a careful child can learn, did not watch any of it. He watched the glass. Because the floor was black glass and the cups were dull pewter, but the pebble under one of them was a common stone, and a common stone, dragged across glass, leaves the faintest ghost of grit, a dull breath of a smear that the light catches when it catches nothing else. And Harry had spent 7 years learning to read the smear a thing leaves behind, the wet ring of a glass set down where it should not have been, the dust disturbed on a shelf he was forbidden, the small evidences that tell a watched child where the danger has lately been. He did not follow the cups, he followed the smudge. And when Merlin's hands at last went still and the music stopped and the old dark eyes lifted to him with a question in them, Harry pointed without hesitation at the cup on the left which had not been lifted last, which the whole performance had labored to make him forget. That one, he said. It's been heavier the whole time. You can see where it's been dragging. Merlin lifted the cup. The pebble sat under it, gray and unremarkable, and exactly where Harry had said. For a long moment the greatest wizard who ever lived said nothing. Then he sat back in his chair of pale roots, and the constellations on his robe stilled entirely, every one of them turning, the chronicler will swear to it, to face the small figure in the smaller chair. And when Merlin spoke again, the wryness had gone out of his voice, and what replaced it was quieter and harder to bear, the voice of a man who has waited a very long time at a window and has finally, against all his disciplined expectation, seen movement on the road. Watch the table, he said, and not the hands. Do you know how many of them watch the hands? All of them. Every king and every clever man and the witch who waited a year and a day. They watch my hands because the hands are where the cleverness performs, and they were all so busy being too clever to be fooled that they were fooled by the cleverest thing of all, which is the assumption that the answer lives wherever the show is loudest. You looked where no one was performing. Child, that is not a trick I taught you. That is a habit the cupboard taught you, and the cupboard, may its makers answer for it, has accidentally made the one student I have wanted for 1,000 years. The one student, Harry repeated it. The word sat oddly in his mouth, 2 sizes too large, a coat handed down from someone who had once been important. No one had ever wanted him for anything that was not a chore. He turned the pebble over twice before he found the real question under the strangeness of it. Did you know them? My mum and dad, Merlin's light dimmed by a shade, the way a candle leans when a door is opened somewhere far off in the house. No, he said, and he did not dress the word up, which Harry noted, because the adults he knew dressed their refusals until you could not tell a no from a yes until it was much too late. I have been 1,000 years in the dark, child, and the green world has turned its dead over 100 times since last I knew a living face. I do not know your mother's name. I do not know your father's. I cannot give you the thing you came down the stair already missing, and I will not insult you by inventing it. There are men above who will tell you they loved your parents and mean only that they have found a use for the sun, and you will learn to know those men by the warmth in their voices, which runs always 1 degree too high, like milk a day from turning. Harry looked at the pebble. But I will tell you the one thing I can read, Merlin went on, and the light of him leaned closer. I read the make of a soul the way a smith reads the temper of a blade by the color it goes in the fire. And whoever made you, child, whatever became of them after, made you with the open hand. That is not learned in 7 years. That is poured in at the very start, or it is not there at all. Somebody before the cupboard, before the fists, before the long arithmetic of going without, taught your hand to hold itself open instead of shut, and the cupboard could not beat it back out of you, and the cupboard, I promise you, tried. That is not nothing. That is in plain fact the only part of you that finally matters, and you had it from them, and they are therefore not so wholly gone as the gravestones would prefer. The dead leave their work inside the living. It is the only afterlife I have found in 1,000 years that is worth the name. It was not the thing Harry had wanted, which was a face, a voice, some story with the two of them moving and alive inside it. It was a different thing, plainer and heavier and somehow able to be lifted, and he put it where he kept the river and the bent nail, in the room inside himself that no inspector ever entered. "Now," said Merlin briskly, in the manner of a good teacher moving a child past a hurt before it can harden, "you have played my game and asked your question and answered mine without quite saying yes, and you have earned a showing. Not a lesson, the lessons are long and begin later and will at hours make you sorry you ever found the stair. A showing, get up and come to the hearth." Harry crossed to the cold hearth, broad enough to garage a small car, laid with its white logs that had never once burned. Merlin came with him, not walking, simply being nearer, the chair of roots left empty behind them. "There are two ways to make a fire with the wool alone," Merlin said, "and the difference between them is the difference between everything they will teach you up there and everything I mean to teach you down here. The wand folk, the witches and wizards of your own age, who are real, child, and many, and whom you will meet sooner than you would like, make fire by command. They take a stick of wood with a thread of something wild sealed inside it, and they point it, and they say a word in dog Latin, and they compel the air to burn. It is a fine art and a loud one, and it works, and it has one flaw, which is that everything you compel resents you, quietly, the way a beaten thing resents the hand, and the resentment of the world adds up across a life, and is, I have come to think, a great part of what curdles a powerful man. That is pushing. Watch me push." He raised one hand toward the logs, and the silver in his light gathered to a point, and a long moment passed, and nothing whatever happened. "I cannot push," said Merlin, unbothered. "I have no hands, a letter cannot strike a match, which is convenient, as pushing is not what I wish to show you. The older way, the way the door is built of, the way the thing below cannot abide, is not command. It is invitation. You do not order the fire to come. You make a room for it and you offer freely, expecting nothing, and a freely made offering is the one force in creation that asks no payment and therefore can be refused by nothing that is honest. The logs want to burn. It is the whole purpose of a log, the warm bright end it was grown for. You do not make them burn, you give them leave. Now you try, hold out your hand and do not push. Pushing is what you did on the hill under the tree when the tide went out of you and down into the dark. You have pushed once already today, and it opened a door no king could open, so I know the strength is in you. Set it down. We are not opening anything. We are giving a cold log the thing it has wanted for 1,000 years, which is to be of use." Harry held out his hand toward the logs. He thought at first of pushing, of the way the morning had cracked open on the hill, and he felt the tide stir far down in him and stop, because pushing was a thing that happened to him when he was cornered, and he was not cornered now. He was sitting at the bottom of the world with a kind chair behind him and an old man made of light who had told him the truth 4 times running. So he did the other thing, the thing he had no word for and did anyway, the thing the chair had done for his shoulders without being asked. He made room. He thought of the log, white and patient and never once allowed its purpose, and he thought with the uncomplicated generosity of a child who has been given a seat sized exactly for him. "You can, it's all right, go on," and he did not grab and he did not push and he wanted nothing back. A single white log caught. The flame that ran along it was not the orange of the Dursleys' gas fire. It was a cool, clean silver, the silver of the veins in the walls, and it gave a light without heat and a warmth without burning, and it lit Harry's face from below and found there the thing that the chronicler has been forbidden to name and will instead simply report, that the corners of his mouth had gone, without his permission, somewhere they had not been all day. Merlin looked at the small silver fire and at the child who had made it by giving instead of taking, and the light of the great dead wizard stood very still. 1,000 years, he said again, more softly than before, and they send me this. Harry sat back down. He still had the gray pebble in his palm, turning it over, because turning small things over was a thing his hands did while the rest of him caught up. "So what happens now?" he said. "I let you in," said Merlin, "because you opened a door I made certain could not be opened, which means that whatever the door was waiting for, you are it, and I do not get to argue with 1,000 years of my own carefulness merely because the answer turned out to be small and missing a shoe. But the cups, yes. The cups told me a second thing the door could not. The door told me what you are not greedy, not grasping, not a hunter. The cups told me what you are a watcher. And a watcher, child, is the only thing this place has ever needed, because this place, whatever the gravestones of legends say of it, is not a tomb." He lifted his hand again and the hall changed around them, not moving, simply confessing. The carved walls Harry had walked between came clear in his memory and clearer in the air, the stags and the wolves in the falling towers, and Merlin let the light run across them so that the long story on the stone told itself once more, and this time Harry could half follow it, the way you can half follow a song in a language you don't speak by the shape the singer's face makes. "They will tell you I am buried here," said Merlin. "They have been telling each other that for 1,000 years, and it has kept them comfortably wrong, which is the chief use of a good legend. A man's grave is a place people stop looking, and I needed a place people would stop looking because what I left here is the most important thing I ever did and the last thing I would wish found by the curious. This is not a grave, it is a watchtower. It only points downward instead of up. Downward at what?" Merlin was quiet for a moment, and the 12-lamped wheel above the cold hearth turned a fraction, and a second lamp woke and glowed faint gold beside the first. "At a door I did not build," he said, "and cannot open and dare not, and have spent the dregs of my life and the whole of my death keeping shut. There is a thing beneath this hall, child, deeper than the deep, older in its hungers than I am old in my years, and I bound it here when I was strong, in the last good summer of the world I knew, and the binding cost me everything I had and one thing I did not know I was spending, which was the strength to finish the job. I bound it, I did not unmake it. There is a difference, and the difference is the reason you are sitting in that chair. A binding is a knot, and a knot, given centuries, given the patient working of a thing that has nothing to do but pull, comes loose. I have felt it coming loose for 100 years, the way an old man feels the rein in a bone that was broken in his youth. I cannot tie it again. I am a letter has no hands, but a letter can teach a hand." Harry looked down at his own hands, the gray pebble in one of them. "You want me to fix your knot," he said slowly, "when I'm grown up." "I want," said Merlin, "to be honest with you, which is a thing the adults in your life have spared themselves the trouble of, and I am going to be honest with you even where the honesty is heavy, because a heavy true thing carried young grows into a strong back, while a light lie believed grows into a man who falls down at the first real wind. So, yes. There is a thing I bound and could not unmake, and the binding is failing, and I have waited 1,000 years for a hand the door would accept, because only such a hand can do what must be done. I did not choose you. I could not have. I have been dead the whole time. The door chose you. I am simply the old man at the bottom of the stair, telling you what the door has gone and done, and asking you, not ordering you, asking you whether you will let me teach you what it means. What it means to do what? "To be my successor," said Merlin, and the word went out into the hall, and the constellations on his robe held still to hear it. "To carry the part of the old art that I alone of all the dead still remember, the grammar they think is lost, the magic of names and need and the giving of things freely, which is older than wands and deeper than blood, and which the door is made of, and which the thing below cannot abide. To stand one day where I once stood, between the world and a hunger that would eat it, and to do better than I did, because you will have what I never had, which is a teacher who has already made every mistake there is to make and kept careful, bitter, useful notes." Harry was 7. "The chronicler asks you to hold that fact the way you would hold something fragile, because it is the most important fact in this hall, more important than Merlin, more important than the thing below." He was 7, and he was tired, and he had lost a shoe, and somewhere above his head a milk float was finishing its round, and his aunt was wondering, without urgency, whether he would turn up in time to be blamed for something. The vast machinery of legend had reached down through 1,000 years in a hill of black glass and set itself before him and asked him a question, and what Harry said, because he was 7 and honest and had been given by a kind chair the unfamiliar luxury of saying what he actually thought, was this: "I'm only little." "Yes," said Merlin, "I can't even stop Dudley." "No," said Merlin, "not yet. And I will not pretend the road from here to there is short, or kind, or that you will walk all of it upright. But I will tell you what I see, because I have had 1,000 years to learn the difference between flattery and sight, and what I tell a person is one or the other and never both. I see a child who, cornered with nothing, reached for no power and was given the greatest. I see a child who watched the table while kings watch the hands. I see a hand the door loves, and the door child has better judgment than I do, which I say is the proudest man who ever lived. I am not asking you to be ready. No one is ever ready. Readiness is a story the unready tell to feel less alone. I am asking whether you will begin." "How long does it take?" said Harry, and it was such a practical question, such a small and human question dropped into the middle of the operatic dark, that Merlin laughed, and the laugh was warmer than the light. "Now there," he said, "is the watcher again, asking the question that matters, while the kings would be asking about the size of the reward. The answer is the one piece of good news I have, and you will need it, so attend. Time does not run here the way it runs above. This hall was made to keep, the way a cellar keeps, and what it keeps best is hours. Look at the wheel above the hearth, 12 lamps. When all 12 are lit, a single hour will have passed in the green world above, in your privet drive, under your milk float, and your aunt's incurious eye. But down here in that same hour you and I will have a day. A full day, child, to learn in, to fail in, to sleep in, while above you the kettle has not yet boiled. They will not miss you. You will be home, I should think, before the streetlights, with a day's worth of learning in you and an hour's worth of absence to explain. Or is kind to the hunted in that way too. It gives the cornered child the one thing the cornered child never has, which is time." Harry looked up at the wheel and its 2 lit lamps and did the arithmetic, because doing arithmetic was another thing his hands did in his head, while the rest of him decided things. A day for every hour. That meant he could come down the stair after the chores and go home before tea and have learned for a day. That meant the cupboard, for once, was not the whole of the clock. He turned the pebble over in his fingers and looked at the old man made of light, who had not once told him he was nothing, who had given him a chair sized exactly for him, who had said, "Yes, you are only little, and no, you cannot stop Dudley," and had not made either of those things a door slammed in his face, but a true thing laid out plain on a table, the way the pebble was laid out plain when the cup came up. "If I say yes," he said, "can I still go home?" Something crossed Merlin's ancient face that the chronicler will not name, because Harry did not name it, because Harry was busy watching the wheel. "You can go home," Merlin said. "I will not keep you. A successor kept by force is a prisoner, and a prisoner learns only how to escape, which is a fine art and entirely the wrong one. You will come and go by the stair. The hill will know you now. It will open to your hand and to no other, and close behind you, and keep its secret from the green world the way it has kept it from kings. You will live up there in your cupboard with your river you have not told me the name of and need not, and you will be a small, unremarkable child whom no one suspects, which is the safest thing in the world to be, and you will come down here and be something else, and the two will be your secret, and a secret child well kept is the strongest wall a person ever builds. And then one day the knot comes loose. And then one day," Merlin agreed, "the knot comes loose. But not today and not this year, and not if the old bone in me reads the rain right for some years yet. There is time, real time, the rarest commodity in any tale worth telling, and I mean to spend it teaching you so thoroughly that when the day comes you will meet it not as a cornered child driven blind into the dark, but as the one person living who was raised from the age of 7 to stand exactly there. That is the cruelty I warned you of. I am going to give a small hunted boy the heaviest thing in the world to carry, and I am going to start before his hands are grown, because the thing below will not wait for his hands to grow, and I would rather send into that dark a child who has been trained and warned and loved a little than a man who walks in blind because his elders were too tender to warn him in time. I have buried a great many of the brave. I have no intention of burying you." Harry was quiet. He looked at the pebble and the cups and the wheel and the old man and the carved walls with their stags and their towers, and the long story written in light that he now understood was, in some way he could not yet hold, also a story about him, the shape of him, the empty open hand. And he was about to speak. The chronicler believes he was about to say yes. The small, enormous word was forming behind his teeth when the hall rang. It was a bell, or the ghost of one, or the memory a bell leaves in the air after the iron has gone still, and it did not come from the wheel or the hearth or the chair of roots. It came from below. It came up through the black glass floor the way the cold air had come up the stair, a single deep tolling note that Harry felt in the soles of his one shod foot and his one bare one, a note that had nothing of music in it and everything of arithmetic, the sound of a count advancing by one. The two lit lamps on the wheel guttered. Far down in the deep beneath the deep, something that had been pulling patiently at a knot for 1,000 years stopped pulling, and listened and turned the great slow weight of its attention upward, toward the new warmth in the hall, toward the small living thing that had walked in through a door that had been shut to everyone, toward Harry. Merlin came up out of his chair, and he was not warm now, and he was not wry, and the light of him had gone hard and white and very tall, filling the hall to its hidden vault, 1,000 years of held purpose standing suddenly upright. And when he spoke his voice was the voice of the door, the voice that had asked who comes, the voice that does not raise itself because it has never in its existence needed to. "It heard you come in," said Merlin. "Of course it did. A thing that has listened for 1,000 years hears a held breath let go. And up above, child, in your green world, others heard the hill open too, men with instruments and ambitions and long memories, and they are even now lifting their heads from their work and saying to one another, 'What was that?' We have less time than I hoped and more than they know, and the first lesson begins now, tonight, before that note below has finished fading, because the count has advanced and I will not waste a stroke of it." The white light bent toward the small chair, and the dark eyes in the country of lines found Harry's and held them. "I asked you whether you would begin. The bell has rather made the question urgent. Child, will you begin?" And from somewhere very far above, faint through 1,000 years of hill and a fence gone orange with rust, a clock on a church in Little Winging began, ordinary and indifferent, to strike the hour. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The bell across Britain in a circular room at the top of a tower in the north, among portraits who pretended to sleep and instruments who did not pretend anything. An old man sat very still and listened to a sound that he alone in all of Britain had been waiting the better part of a century to hear, and praying the whole of that century that he never would. The office of the headmaster of Hogwarts was an attic of marvels, a magpie's hoard kept by a magpie of unusual taste and unusual reach. There were the spinning silver instruments, of course, the ones that puffed small clouds and ticked in languages of their own, set going by their owner for reasons he explained to no one, and altered when anyone got close to guessing. There was a stone basin of swirling silver memory. There was a perch, presently occupied by a bird the color of a sunset that has made up its mind to be a fire, who watched his master with the particular patience of a creature that has died more often than the master has, and minds it less. And there was, in a glass case set apart from the rest, on a shelf no student had ever been permitted to dust, a single object that did not spin or tick or shine, a plain gray stone the size of a fist, perfectly ordinary, perfectly still, and connected by no mechanism that any visitor could see to the wizard who had kept it under glass for 90 years. The stone had begun at 9:20 that morning to ring. It made no sound a portrait could have heard. It rang in a register beneath sound, the way a struck bell goes on shivering the air long after the ear has given up on it, and Albus Dumbledore had felt it in the fillings of his teeth and the old break in his nose, and the place behind the breastbone where a man keeps the things he has decided not to feel. He had set down his quill. He had folded his hands. And he had sat while the morning wore itself away into afternoon and the instruments fretted and the bird watched, doing the only thing he had ever truly been a master of, which was thinking ahead of everyone else down branching corridors of consequence, toward doors that no one else had noticed were there. The gray stone was a twin. Its brother lay 1,000 years deep beneath a hill in Surrey, set into the rim of a door, and 90 years ago a much younger Albus, brilliant and bereaved and not yet wise, had stood at the rusted fence of the old hollow and worked out, by means he had never written down, that the legend of Merlin's grave was true, and was not a grave, and was a lock. And that the lock could not be opened by power, which had been, at that bright bitter point in his life, a personal insult, since power was the thing he had recently decided to organize his soul around. He had tried the door, of course he had tried the door. He had been, the chronicler must record in fairness, humbler about it than most, coming alone and at night and telling no one. And the door had read the wanting under his humility the way it read the wanting under everyone's, and had declined him, courteously, forever. He had taken the twin stone instead, the one loose keystone the makers had left as a kind of receipt, and he had carried it home and put it under glass, and he had told himself that he was keeping watch over a great and dangerous secret for the good of all, which was true, and that this was the whole of his reason, which was not. Because there was a second secret, deeper than the first, and Dumbledore had spent 90 years not looking at it directly. The way you do not look directly at the sun, you nonetheless arrange your whole garden around. He knew what the watchtower watched. He had read in the oldest and least trustworthy books, in the marginalia of dead paranoics. In one terrifying half-page he had paid a great deal to read once and never been allowed to read again, what Merlin had bound beneath that hill. He knew the shape of the thing that waited under the seal, and he had built patiently across decades a quiet architecture of contingency around the certainty that one day the seal would fail and the thing would wake, and that when it did, Britain would need a weapon or a champion or a sacrifice, and would need someone wise and weary and willing to decide in advance which of those three the right person was to be. He had rather thought the right person was going to be Harry Potter. This was not cruelty. The chronicler is obliged, in the interest of accuracy, to insist that it was not cruelty, because cruelty is easy to forgive, and what Dumbledore practiced was harder. It was love arranged into strategy, until the two could no longer be told apart by the one practicing them. He had looked at the orphan he placed on a doorstep 6 years before, the child marked by a prophecy and a scar and a mother's dying work, and he had seen, with the long sight that was his gift and his affliction, a piece of unusual value on a board where the other side did not yet know the game had resumed. He had arranged the child's childhood the way a gardener arranges a tree he means one day to make into a particular shape, a little starved of sun so the reaching would be strong, a little starved of love so the first warmth offered would buy a loyalty that lasted, kept ignorant, kept small, kept safe, kept his. He had told himself it was protection, and it was protection, and that was the genius and the rot of it, that every cruel thing he did was also, measurably, a kindness, so that no ledger could ever quite convict him, least of all his own. And now the stone was ringing, which meant the door had opened, which meant the impossible, which meant that someone had walked into the watchtower a decade before Albus had scheduled the watchtower to become relevant, and the only question that mattered, the question he turned down all its branching corridors through the long afternoon, was who. He did not at first suspect the child. That is the thing he would come to find least forgivable in himself later, when there was a later. He suspected a grave robber, a foreign power, a resurgence of the old enemy's scattered servants. He suspected, with a flicker that he disciplined at once, that Gellert had found a way to reach a hand out of a German cell. He sat through the afternoon composing and discarding the faces of every adult in Britain ambitious, and able enough to crack a lock that had refused him at the height of his powers, and not one of those faces was small, and not one of them was missing a shoe, because the possibility that the door had at last been opened by precisely the kind of person it was built to admit had been bred out of his imagination by 90 years of thinking like the kind of person it was built to refuse. The bird on the perch made a low sound, 3 notes, the sound it made when its master had been wrong about something and had not yet noticed. "Yes, Fawkes," said Albus Dumbledore to the only creature in the world he did not manage. "I know, the instruments agree with you. Something has changed that I did not change, and I find I have grown so very used to being the one who changes things." He rose, and the joints of 90 years made their small complaints, and he crossed to the glass case and looked down at the gray stone ringing its silent ring, and the half-moon spectacles caught the light of the fretting instruments, and behind them the blue eyes were kind and were also doing arithmetic, the same arithmetic they always did, the arithmetic of the greater good, in which individual children were variables, and the only constant was that Albus Dumbledore would decide. "Well," he said softly, to the stone, to the hill, to the thousand-year dark, "let us go and see who has come to the door, and let us hope for everyone's sake that they are someone I can talk to." It was, the chronicler notes, the most dangerous sentence spoken in Britain that day, and it was spoken gently by a good man, which is how the most dangerous sentences usually arrive. The Ministry of Magic learned of the matter the way a great body learns it has been wounded, not through the mind, but through 100 small nerves all firing at once and disagreeing about where it hurts. In a windowless room 3 floors below the atrium, where the Department for the Regulation of Improbable Events kept its instruments, a brass needle that had not moved in the working memory of any clerk swung hard against its pin and stayed there quivering, and a junior witch named Hopkirk, who had drawn the unlucky shift, spent 40 minutes deciding whether reporting it would make her look diligent or insane, and chose diligent and was wrong and was promoted anyway. Which is the Ministry in a single anecdote. Up in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a detection ward keyed to large unsanctioned workings shrieked once and went dark, having registered something off the top of its scale and concluded sensibly that it must be broken. And in the deep archive where the trace was tended, a clerk noted that an unregistered surge of considerable size had bloomed and vanished in Surrey, in a Muggle district, near no school and no registered residence, and filed it under accidental magic, juvenile, which was correct, and missed by that filing the largest understatement of the decade. The reports climbed as reports do, converging upward toward the few desks in the building where men sat who were paid to assemble small wrongnesses into large meanings. One of those desks belonged to Bartemius Crouch. Crouch was a man assembled entirely out of rules, the way some men are assembled out of appetites and others out of grievances. He had a mustache that looked ironed and a parting that looked legislated, and a reputation lately for having fallen. He had been, not so many years before, the iron hand of the wartime ministry, the one who signed the harsh warrants and locked the dark doors, and was spoken of as the next minister by everyone including himself. And then his own son had been dragged before the court in chains, a Death Eater in the family of the law's own champion, and Crouch had sent his own son to Azkaban with his own voice and his own face composed, and the watching world had decided with the cruelty of crowds that a man who would do that to his son had no warmth left to govern with, and had quietly moved him sideways into cooperation, into committees, into the long gray corridor down which the once powerful are walked toward the exit. He sat now at a smaller desk than he was built for, and he read the reports out of Surrey, and the part of him that was made of rules saw a violation, and the part of him that was made of ambition, which he would have denied owning, saw a door. "A surge," he said to the witch who had brought the file, "of this size leaves a mark. Where is the mark? There's no registered." "I did not ask what is registered. I asked where is the mark." Crouch did not raise his voice. Crouch had never in his life needed to raise his voice. He had a way of lowering it instead, so that the room had to lean toward him to be governed. "Something opened in Surrey this morning that was large enough to deafen our wards and quiet enough to leave no trace our archive can read, which is a contradiction. And contradictions, madam, are merely facts that have not yet been made to confess. Pull the Muggle reports. A thing that loud will have spooked a dog, cracked a pane, curdled a milk round. Find me the ordinary damage around the extraordinary silence, and you will find me the place." He set the file down with the precision of a man laying a stone in a wall he intends to be remembered by. "I will go myself." He should not have gone himself. A man of his rank and his diminishment had no business in the field, and he knew it, and that was precisely why he went, because a man being walked toward the exit will seize any door that opens off the corridor, and Bartemius Crouch had recognized, in the contradiction out of Surrey, the smell of the kind of large, important irregularity that returns a fallen man to the center of things. He was not the only one who smelled it. Word of an unusual event travels through the ministry along 2 channels, the official one, which is slow and goes upward, and the other one, which is instantaneous and goes sideways, into the wood-paneled rooms and the private flues and the long luncheons where the actual government of magical Britain is transacted by men who have never stood for an election in their lives. By the time Crouch had pulled his cloak from its peg, a soft-spoken inquiry had already been made, through 3 intermediaries, by a person who preferred his inquiries to arrive without a name attached. And that person in a drawing-room some distance from the ministry, a drawing-room of peacock blue silk and very old dark things kept in very good glass, set down a letter and looked out at his white grounds and permitted himself the precise expression of a man who has heard a coin drop in a distant room and recognized by the ring of it that the coin is gold. Lucius Malfoy collected things. He would have told you, had you been worth the telling, that he collected history, that he was a custodian of the great and fragile heritage of wizardkind against the vulgar tide of the age, and there was even a grain of truth in it, as there is in all the most useful lies a man tells about himself. What he collected, in plainer words, was advantage that wore the costume of beauty. He owned wands that had ended lines of kings. He owned a goblet that the goblins had 4 times petitioned to recover, and 4 times been refused, with documents. He owned, in a cabinet he showed to no one, a small black book that a certain old friend had given into his keeping for safe holding, the contents of which he had never read, and the importance of which he had correctly intuited and incorrectly estimated. And he had heard, in the ring of the dropped coin from Surrey, the rumor he had been quietly paying to be told for 15 years, that the oldest and most refused of all locked doors, the one the legends hung Merlin's name upon, had been, against every precedent, opened. A door that has been shut since before the founders raised their school does not open for nothing. Behind such a door, Lucius reasoned, sipping, there was either a corpse which was worth a great deal, or a treasure which was worth more, or a power which was worth everything. And a power newly woken into the world was a thing that attached itself in his experience to whoever reached it first and spoke to it with the most confidence, and Lucius Malfoy had never in his life suffered from a shortage of confidence, only from the tedious necessity of pretending in public to have less of it than he did. "Have the carriage readied," he said, to the house elf that had appeared at the edge of the room the instant his attention drifted toward needing it. "And send word to my friend at the Prophet that I may have a charitable interest in a matter of national heritage that is about to become indelicate. One likes to be quoted correctly." He folded the letter once and dropped it into the fire, where it burned with the obedient promptness of everything in that house. "And ready my son's old things. If the matter touches on the board's interest in education, it will look well for me to be seen taking a paternal concern." The fire took the letter. In the deep places under London, where the fire of that house and the fretting of Dumbledore's instruments and the swinging of the ministry's brass needle all meant precisely nothing, a third party to the morning's business was already reading, by the green light of lamps that had never seen the sun, a far older account of exactly what had happened in Surrey, and reaching a conclusion that neither the wise old man in the north nor the grasping man in the White House would have liked at all. Goblins do not keep secrets the way wizards keep them, which is to say badly in their own heads where the secrets grow lonely and start talking. Goblins keep secrets the way a vault keeps gold, written down, sealed, indexed, and guarded by something with teeth, and the deepest of all the vaults under Gringotts holds no gold at all, it holds the ledgers. They go down 900 levels, the ledgers, on shelves of cold iron, in a darkness lit green by lamps that burn a fuel the goblins do not sell. And they record in the cramped and beautiful hand of 40 generations of keepers every debt and every compact and every oath sworn between the goblin nation and the upstart wand-bearing world since the days when both were young and the wizards still had the manners to tremble. Most of the ledgers concern money, which is the smallest sort of debt and the easiest to honor. A few concern other things. In one shelf, set apart behind a grill of the pale shell-colored metal that the goblins alone in all the world know how to forge, holds the accounts that the keepers call, among themselves in the old tongue, the debts that are not for paying but for watching. Carrick, keeper of the deep records, eighth of his name to hold the green lamp, had served 400 years on that shelf and had never once in all that time seen an entry change. That morning an entry changed. He was at his high desk when it happened, auditing a compact concerning the river rights of a clan 3,000 miles east, when a line of ink on a page he was not looking at went, very quietly, from black to gold. He knew which page without turning, the way a man knows which of his teeth has begun to ache. He set down his pen. He cleaned the nib, because a keeper does not leave a fouled nib whatever the world is doing, and he rose, and he went to the grill of pale metal, and he unlocked it with a word that had not been spoken aloud in his lifetime, and he took down the oldest ledger on the shelf, the one bound in a hide no living beast had worn, and he opened it to the page that had changed. "The hollow debt," said the heading, in a hand 1,000 years dead, and beneath it, where for 10 centuries there had been only the long black record of a thing sealed and a watch kept and an account left open, a new line had written itself in living gold, the way the ledgers write themselves when the world makes them true. "The door is opened, the heir is come, the debt falls due." Carrick read it 3 times. Then he sat down upon the cold iron floor of the 900th level, which no keeper had done in the memory of the shelf, and he laughed, a short dry bark of a sound, because the alternative was unbecoming, and because the joke was genuinely a good one. It must be understood that the hollow debt was not, to the goblins, a legend. Legends are a wizard's word for facts they have grown too comfortable to verify. To the goblins it was a contract, and a famous one, the grandest piece of work their forges had ever undertaken. For in the last bad year of the old world, the wizard the wand folk called Merlin had come down into the underhalls, not as a conqueror and not as a beggar, but as a craftsman with a commission, and had laid before the goblin king of that age a thing that needed binding, and the goblins had looked upon the thing, and even the goblins had drawn back. They had forged the seal. They had poured into it the pale, unbreakable metal and the deep iron craft and the names that bind, and Merlin had spent his life to set it, and in exchange a compact had been struck, written in this very ledger in the blood of a king and a wizard both, that the goblins would keep the watch records against the day the seal should fail, that they would render no account of the matter to any wand-bearing authority, crown nor ministry nor school, who had not earned it. And that when the door above the seal at last opened and an heir came to take up Merlin's unfinished work, that heir and that heir alone among all the wizarding world would stand in goblin law not as a customer, not as a thief, not as one of the careless overworld borrowers the nation had learned to hold cheap, but as a named friend of the nation, an oath creditor, owed the truth and owed the forge and owed, should it come to that, the axe. An heir, said Carrick to the green dark, after 1,000 years. Wonderful, and the wand folk will have noticed too, which means by tomorrow there will be ministry boots and a Malfoy and very probably that meddling schoolmaster all stamping about on top of our seal like children on a frozen pond, none of them able to read the ice. He closed the ledger. The gold line went on glowing through the hide. Someone competent had better get there first. He did not go to the director. The compact was older than the director's office and named the keeper of the deep records by his title, which meant the duty fell to Carrick personally, which suited Carrick personally, who had spent 400 years dusting a debt and was not about to let a committee handle the one morning it came alive. He drew from the locked drawer of his high desk 3 things: a writ of the compact copied fair in his own hand and sealed in the pale metal so that no wizard charm could alter a word of it, a purse of the kind of small heavy facts that opened doors faster than gold, and a long knife of goblin make, not because he expected to use it, but because a creditor who arrives to collect 1,000-year debt without a blade is a creditor the debtor does not take seriously. Mind the shelf, he told his underkeeper, a young thing of a mere 200 years who had gone the color of the lamps, and if anyone from the upper bank asks where I have gone, tell them the truth, which they will not understand, which is the most secure form of secret there is. Tell them the holodebt has fallen due, and the keeper has gone to find the heir before the wizards lose him. And Carrick, keeper of the deep records, 8th of his name, went up out of the green dark toward the surface of a world he held in measured and professional contempt, to find a child whose name he did not know, and to do the one thing goblins do better than any race that has ever drawn breath, which is to honor, exactly and to the letter and 1,000 years late, a debt that everyone else had agreed to forget. 1,000 years and 400 years and 90 years of waiting then, all converging at once upon a green mound in Surrey, and at the center of that convergence, entirely unaware of any of it, a child climbed back up a stair of black glass into the long evening of the day he had run from Dudley, and found that almost no time had passed at all. The hill closed behind Harry the moment his one-shod foot left the top step, the turf knitting shut over the opening without a seam, the lightning-killed hawthorn standing ordinary and dead against a sky that had not finished being afternoon. He stood on the crown of the old hollow in the slanting light, and the chronicler wishes it recorded that the first thing he did, the very first, was check his arithmetic, because that is the kind of child he was. He had been below for a day. A whole day he had eaten there from a board that filled itself with plain good food when Merlin's attention turned toward feeding him, the first meal in memory that no one had measured before setting it down. He had slept an hour in a chair that held him. He had made a log burn silver 4 more times until it came almost easy. And up here the shadows had moved the width of a hand. The church clock he had heard strike had struck, it seemed, more or less on time. An hour. He had been gone an hour. He let himself out through the rusted mouth in the fence and walked home through the ordinary streets in his one shoe, and the ordinary streets did not look at him. And that was the strangest part, stranger than the stair, stranger than the silver fire. That he could carry a thing that enormous through Privet Drive and have it weigh nothing on the outside, have it not show, have the world go on filing him under nobody while he walked past it with the underneath of a hill folded up inside his chest. At number 4 he was shouted at for the lost shoe, and the shout ran its familiar length, and he stood in it and let it pass over him, and discovered that it could not reach the place where the river was, where the bent nail was, where now a silver fire and an old man made of light had come to live. Aunt Petunia put him in the cupboard without supper, which she believed to be a punishment, and Harry lay in the dark and looked at the 9 nails and was not, that night, alone in there. He did not tell the bent nail about Merlin. Some secrets are too large even for the bent nail. But he turned the gray pebble over in his fingers, the one from the cups which he had carried up the stair without deciding to, and he thought about giving instead of grabbing, and somewhere above him 3 full people slept the sleep of the comfortably incurious, and below the whole town the seal advanced its count by 1, and Harry Potter fell asleep planning with the gravity of a quartermaster how to get back down the stair tomorrow without anyone wondering where the library boy had gone. It was not difficult. That was the gift the cupboard had accidentally given him, the one Merlin had named. A child no one watches can go almost anywhere. The next morning the chores were done by 9, and Harry was over the back fence by 1/2 and the hill opened to his hand the instant he laid it on the turf, the way Merlin had promised, knowing him now, and closed behind him, and below the stair the green lamps of his real education were already lit. He learned the names of things which Merlin said were the bones of the old art. He learned that you do not make light, you ask the dark to step aside, and that the dark, asked politely and owed nothing, often will. He learned to fail, which Merlin treated as the only respectable way to spend an afternoon, and to fail without flinching, and to find in the wreck of a working the one wrong assumption that had sunk it. And every evening, by the arithmetic of the wheel, he climbed back up into an hour that had barely moved, and went home to a house that thought it knew exactly where he had been, and kept, behind the most ordinary face in Surrey, the largest secret in Britain. He kept it well, he would need to. Because while the library boy came and went through the fence unremarked, the rest of the wizarding world had spent those same thin above-ground hours converging on his secret with the single-mindedness of iron filings discovering a magnet. By the second dusk, the waste ground at the edge of Little Winging had acquired more distinguished visitors than it had hosted in the whole of its derelict career. Bartemius Crouch came first, because rules move faster than appetites when the rules are properly motivated, and he came as he did everything, alone and early and correct. He had found the place precisely as he said he would, by triangulating the ordinary damage around the extraordinary silence. A milk float whose bottles had cracked in their crate at 9:20, a row of dogs that had refused their gardens for a day and a night. And when he condescended to the indignity of questioning Muggle children, which he did with the expression of a man handling something sticky, a confused and contradictory legend already forming among them about a hill that ate Dudley Dursley's whole gang and a boy who ran in and did not come out. Crouch stood at the rusted fence in the failing light and looked at a low green mound with a dead tree on top of it, and his instruments told him that something of the first magnitude had happened here, and his eyes told him that nothing whatever was here to happen to, and the gap between the two readings was the most interesting thing that had occurred to Bartemius Crouch in 5 diminished years. He went in. He walked the mound end to end. He laid his wand against the turf and spoke the words of every revealing charm in the senior repertoire, and the turf received them the way a pond receives a thrown stone, with a brief ring and a closing over and no door. He found the residue of the morning's power, vast and cooling, smeared across the whole hill like the warmth left in a chair. He found no entrance. He found in the end only the certainty that a thing of enormous importance had a way in that he could not see and would not be granted, and Bartemius Crouch, who had built his entire ruined life on the principle that any door could be opened by the correct application of authority, stood on top of a door that did not recognize authority at all, and the muscles worked in his iron jaw, and he said nothing, because there was no one yet to govern with his lowered voice. There was shortly, "My dear Bartemius." The carriage had come without his hearing it, which ought to have been impossible, and Lucius Malfoy descended from it onto the waste ground with the air of a man stepping into a garden party he has graciously agreed to improve by attending. He wore traveling robes that cost more than the houses behind him, and carried a cane he did not lean on, and he picked his way across the rough grass without once permitting it to mark him. What an unlikely place to find a man of your eminence. One had heard you were occupied these days with the regulation of cauldron bottoms, and yet here you are in a field at dusk alone. The ministry's interest in cauldron bottoms must be more athletic than I knew. This is a law enforcement matter, Lucius, said Crouch, and you are standing in it. I am standing, said Lucius pleasantly, in a field that belongs, I believe, to a Muggle council on ground that no statute of yours covers, beside a hill that the older records, the ones your department was never trusted to keep, name a site of considerable magical heritage. The Board of Governors takes a natural interest in heritage. The future of our culture, Bartemius, is education, and education begins with knowing what one has inherited. He turned his pale eyes on the green mound and let them rest there, and for an instant the courtier's mask slipped the width of a hair, and something underneath it looked at the hill the way a creditor looks at a debtor's house. And what one has inherited here would appear to be magnificent. Tell me, have you got in? Crouch did not answer, which was an answer. No, said Lucius softly. Neither shall I expect, which makes the question of who is rather pressing, does it not? Two of the cleverest and least pleasant men in Britain, observed a third voice, mild as milk and entirely unhurried, arguing over a locked door in a Muggle field at sunset. I confess I had hoped my information was exaggerated. It so rarely is. Albus Dumbledore had arrived as he always arrived, which was to say that no one could afterward agree on the moment of it. He was simply there at the gap in the fence, in robes of a purple that the dusk could not quite decide the shade of, his long hands folded, his half-moon spectacles catching the last of the light. Crouch straightened, Lucius's cane stilled in his grip. There of them, the chronicler notes with interest, welcomed his arrival, and both of them stood a little more carefully than they had a moment before, which is the particular tax that a certain kind of greatness levies merely by entering a field. Headmaster, said Lucius, recovering first, because he always recovered first. Your interest in a Surrey hillside is touching. Does Hogwarts now examine in archaeology? Hogwarts examines in a great many things, Lucius, and in one or two it even instructs. Dumbledore came through the gap and onto the waste ground, and he did not walk the mound as Crouch had, and he did not appraise it as Lucius did. He walked to the foot of the hill and he stopped, and he looked up at the dead hawthorn, and one of his hands moved, without his quite seeming to direct it, to the breast of his robes, where against his heart in an inner pocket lined with 90 years of habit, a plain grey stone lay quiet now, its ringing done, warm as a held coin. He had carried its twin's absence inside him for the whole of his long life. He knew this hill the way you know the doorway you were turned away from in your youth, every grain of it printed on a place that does not forget refusals. He laid his palm against the cold turf, gently, the way a man lays a hand on the flank of a horse that has thrown him before. The hill did not open. He had not expected it to. It had read him in his hunger at 30, and it read him in his loss at 120, and it had not changed its mind, because the hill did not keep grudges and did not keep favorites. It kept only the one unbending measure, and Albus Dumbledore, for all that he had become, was still, and would always be a man who had once reached for the door with a wanting in his hand. He knelt there a moment with his palm on the closed earth, and what crossed his ancient face the chronicler will not name, because the two men behind him could not see it, and it was, for that one unobserved moment, not arranged for anyone. Then he stood, and he was the headmaster again, and the arithmetic resumed behind the blue eyes, and it had taken, in that kneeling moment, a turn that neither of his rivals could have followed had they tried. For Dumbledore had felt under his palm the thing that Crouch's charms had missed and Lucius's greed had never thought to look for, that the door was not gone, it was closed. There is an enormous difference between a door that has been destroyed and a door that has been shut by someone who can open it again. And Albus Dumbledore had spent his life learning to feel that difference, and he felt it now, and it meant that somewhere a hand existed that the hill obeyed, and that hand came and went, and the legend the Muggle children were already weaving had a boy in it, a boy who ran into the hill, a boy who did not come out. Except that the simplest reading of a closed door is that whoever shut it had first walked out through it. "A child," said Dumbledore very quietly, to no one, turning the word over the way Harry turned the pebble. "It opened for a child." And the part of him that was wise went still and heavy, and the part of him that was a strategist, quicker and quieter, had already begun to count the uses of the thing, because a child is a thing that can be guided and protected and shaped, and a child who held the key to the most dangerous door in Britain was a child who must, for everyone's sake, for the greater good, belong to someone wise enough to decide what the key was for. And the two parts of Albus Dumbledore agreed, as they had agreed his whole life, that the wise one was him. What none of the three of them saw, because all three were watching each other, was the small square figure that stood in the deeper shadow of the fence at the far side of the waste ground, a figure no higher than a Muggle child and a great deal heavier, wrapped against the dusk, watching the wizards trample the frozen pond of the seal with their fine boots and their finer ignorance, and reading, in the gold-shot residue across the hill that not one of them could properly see, exactly what the ledger had told him. That the door had opened, and the heir had come, and the debt had fallen due. Carrick, keeper of the deep records, took the measure of the three great wizards bickering over the lid of a danger they did not understand, and his lip drew back from his teeth in something a wizard would have misread as a smile. "They will look for him among the great," he said, to the cold air and the closing dark. "They always do. They will sift the old families and the gifted students and the children of consequence, and they will find nothing, because the door does not love consequence. I shall look where they will not." He drew his wrappings closer, and turned from the trampled hill, and went away down the ordinary Muggle street toward the ordinary Muggle houses, a creditor walking patiently into a neighborhood of nobodies to find the one nobody who was owed the truth. And above the seal the wizards argued on into the dark, and a hand's breadth beneath their boots, in a hall of black glass where no time they owned could reach. A child they were already learning to want was learning, by asking and not taking, to fill a cold room with light. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, trials in the deep a day for every hour, and the hours mounted, and the wheel above the cold hearth went round and round, and in the green world above, where a fortnight crawled past full of grasping men and locked turf, Harry Potter lived, in the underneath of the hill, the better part of a year. It did not feel like a year, the chronicler should say, because a child does not measure time in totals but in the distance between one thing and the next, and the distance kept changing shape. There were days that were nothing but a single word said over and over until Harry hated it and then, somewhere past hating it, understood it. There were days he slept more than he learned, because Merlin had discovered that the surest way to ruin a young mind is to fill it faster than it can drain, and had built into the curriculum a great deal of sitting by the silver fire doing nothing in particular, which Harry came to suspect was itself a lesson, and was right. And there were days, the best and worst of them, when something Merlin had been circling for a week finally landed, and the world rearranged itself a little, and Harry walked back up the stair at the end of it with the specific ache of a person who has been made permanently larger and is not yet used to the new dimensions. The first thing Merlin taught him was how to be still. "You are a leaking vessel," the old man said on a day early in the long year, "and I do not say it to wound you, I say it because it is the most promising thing about you. The tide in you goes where your attention goes, and your attention, child, is the attention of a hunted thing. It jumps, it scatters, it is always half on the exits. This served you very well upstairs, where the danger was real and came on legs. It will kill you down here, where the danger is real and comes on patience. So, first, stillness, not the stillness of a cornered rabbit, which is only motion holding its breath. The stillness of deep water. Sit. Find the place behind your breastbone where you keep the things you have decided not to feel, and do not, for once in your short life, decide not to feel them. Let them be there, let them be heavy, and be still around the heaviness, the way the hill is still around us." It was the hardest thing anyone had ever asked Harry to do, harder than the cups, harder than the chores, because the chores at least gave the hands something honest to be busy with. He sat by the silver fire and tried to be deep water, and his attention bolted for the exits the way it always had, and he chased it, which made it worse, and Merlin watched him fail for a long while with the patience of a thing carved out of the hill itself. "You are chasing your attention," Merlin observed after the 40th failure. "Tell me, when a half-wild cat is under your bed, do you reach in and drag it out?" "No," said Harry. "It scratches you, you wait, you leave a bit of food and you wait and you don't look at it." "And there," said Merlin, "is the whole of the discipline taught to you years ago by a cat, and I have wasted an afternoon trying to teach it to you by speech, which proves that even I can be a fool when I forget that the best teachers wear fur. Do not drag your attention out, leave it food and wait and do not look at it. Let it come to the stillness on its own, because it is tired, child, your attention is so tired, it has been standing guard at the exits of you since before you could walk. Tell it the watch is over, tell it someone else has the door tonight." Harry sat by the fire, and he did not chase, and he thought, the watch is over, and somewhere in the great tired animal of his own attention something that had not rested in 7 years lay down, and the silver fire steadied, and the hall went quiet in a way it had not been quiet before, and for 3 whole breaths Harry Potter was deep water. Then he noticed he was doing it, and it broke, and he laughed, and Merlin laughed too, and said, 3 breaths. The witch of the high cold north managed 2, and she had studied 40 years, tomorrow 4. That was the shape of the teaching in those first months, not the filling of an empty boy with power, but the patient unlearning of the 1,000 small flinches that a hunted childhood had built into him, each one undone the way you undo a knot, by finding the loose end and refusing to pull. And underneath the stillness, once the stillness would hold, Merlin began to lay the bones of the old art, which were names. "Everything has a name," he said, "and I do not mean the noise you make to call a thing to dinner. I mean the name a thing answers to in itself, the shape of what it is, the word it would say if you asked it, very quietly in the dark, 'What are you?' The Wan folk have forgotten this. They have a noise for fire and a noise for light and a flick of the wrist to go with each, and the noises work, after a fashion, the way a stranger gets your attention by shouting your surname in the street. But a thing called by its true name does not obey you. It recognizes you. There is all the difference in the world between a servant and a friend, and the old art is built entirely on friends." He learned the name of stillness first, because you cannot hear anything else until you have heard that one. Then he learned the name of light, which was not a word he could write down, because it was not made of sounds. It was made of the particular way you hold the wish to see when you have stopped needing to be seen. Then he learned the name of stone, which took a month, because stone is patient and does not give its name to anyone in a hurry, and the lesson of the month was as much about Harry's hurry as about the stone. And when he had the name of stone, Merlin taught him warding. "A ward is a promise you teach a place to keep," the old man said. "You do not build a wall. Walls are a Wan folk habit, and walls can be thrown down, because a wall is a thing you imposed, and the world is forever trying to shrug off the things imposed upon it. A ward is different. A ward is the stone agreeing of its own accord to remember a shape, the way you remember the face of someone who was once kind to you. You ask, the stone considers. If the asking is clean, the stone keeps the promise long after you are dust, because a promise freely given between a person and a place is the strongest small magic there is, and the door upstairs is only the grandest example of it. Harry tried to ward a circle on the floor of the practice chamber, a plain ring of black glass that Merlin had set aside for the breaking of things. He found the name of the stone, which he had earned the slow way, and he held the shape of the promise, a simple one, a boundary a hand's breadth high that would let through warmth and turn away cold, and it began to work. He could feel the stone consider him, the great slow attention of the floor turning toward the small warm asking thing kneeling on it, and the chronicler will report that this was the moment Harry made his mistake, because feeling the stone begin to say yes, he wanted it, suddenly and badly, as he had wanted so many things in his life that had been snatched back, and wanting it he reached, and reaching he pushed. The ward turned inside out. It is a precise thing, the failure of a working, and it deserves a precise telling. The promise Harry had been offering the stone freely became in the instant of his grasping a thing he was trying to take, and the old art does not permit taking, and the force he had gathered to give had to go somewhere, and it went, the way water goes, to the lowest place, which was Harry. The boundary he had meant to lay on the floor laid itself on him instead. The cold he had meant to turn away turned inward. He went over sideways onto the black glass with a sound driven out of him that was not quite a cry, and his nose ran red onto the floor, and his right hand, the asking hand, the one he had pushed with, seized into a claw and would not open, every tendon in it ringing like a struck wire, and for a long moment the boundary squeezed him in its hand's breadth ring, and he could not get a breath past it. Then Merlin was there, not with haste, which would have made it worse, but with the same deep stillness he had spent months teaching, kneeling in the spreading red, his old light cool and close. "Do not fight it," he said. "You know this. It is your own promise, turned the wrong way. You cannot break it. It is too well made. You made it too well, which is the compliment buried in the injury. You can only do what you did to the cat. Stop dragging. Let the watch be over. Tell it the truth, that you did not mean to take, that you forgot, that you are sorry. A promise will forgive an honest breaker. Speak to it." Harry, curled on the floor with the cold ring crushing his ribs and the blood in his mouth, did the hardest thing, which was to stop trying to escape the thing hurting him, and instead, between the small failures of his breath, to mean an apology to a circle of stone. "I didn't mean to grab," he told it without words, in the place behind the breastbone that he no longer kept locked. "I just wanted it so much. I'm sorry." And the ward, which was his own clean promise wearing the mask of a punishment, heard the honesty under the words the way the door upstairs heard it, and loosened and let him go, and lay back down quiet on the floor where he had first meant to set it, warmth in and cold out, exactly as designed, keeping its promise now to an empty ring because the asking had in the end been clean. Harry lay on his back and breathed, his hand ached, his nose had stopped. Above him the hidden vault held its drifting motes of light, indifferent and beautiful, and beside him the greatest wizard who ever lived sat back on his heels and waited, and did not say there, and did not say well done, and did not say any of the soft useless things because he was waiting, the chronicler understood, to see whether Harry would do the one thing that mattered more than any working, which was to ask the right question about what had just happened to him. Harry asked it. He lay on the floor of the world and worked it out aloud slowly in the voice of a child assembling a rule from the wreckage of an afternoon. "It's not that it doesn't work if you push," he said. "It works, it just works on you instead, because the magic is the giving. If I give, it goes out. If I grab, there's nothing to grab with, so it grabs the nearest thing, and the nearest thing is me." He turned his aching hand over and looked at it. "That's why the door won't open for people who want it. It's not a rule somebody made up, it's just what the magic is. You literally can't take it. Taking is the one thing it can't do." Merlin was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and very gently, with a hand of light that Harry felt as a coolness rather than a touch, closed Harry's cramped fingers the rest of the way and opened them again, easing the wire-tight tendons one by one. "In 1,000 years," he said, "I have taught this art to 3 people. The first died of it. The second went mad with the wanting it forbids, which is a slower dying. The third is lying in his own blood on my floor, having deduced, from a single failure in an afternoon, the principle it took me 40 years and the ruin of my youth to learn. I did not give you that rule, child. I want you to mark that. I have been at pains all year not to give you the rules, because a rule you are given is a wall, and a rule you find is a ward, and it will hold when I am gone. You found it. It is yours now. It will keep its promise to you long after this old letter has finished reading itself aloud." There was one lesson Merlin would not let him hurry, and it was the lesson Harry liked least, because it had nothing to do with making things happen and everything to do with letting things go. "You have learned to ask," Merlin said, "and to ask cleanly, which is most of the art. But the deepest working there is, the one the whole of the old grammar bends toward, is not asking, it is giving. And a person can only give truly and freely what he has first allowed himself to love, because a thing you never let yourself want costs nothing to part with, and a gift that costs nothing is not a gift, it is merely tidying. Do you understand? No, you do not. You are 7 and you own nothing, which means you have been spared the lesson and denied it both. So, show me the thing in your pocket." Harry's hand closed, without his deciding it, over the gray pebble from the cups, the one he had carried up and down the stair for a year, the first thing in his life that no one had given him and no one could take to punish him because no one knew he had it. "It's just a stone," he said. "It is the only thing you own in all the world," said Merlin gently, "and we both know it, and that is exactly why I am going to ask you to give it to the fire." Harry looked at the silver fire on the cold hearth. He looked at the pebble. It was gray and unremarkable and warm from his pocket, and it was his, the one fixed point in a life of being moved and unmoved at other people's convenience, and the wanting to keep it rose in him so hard and so fast that he understood, in the rising of it, more about the ever-wanting than a year of lessons had taught him. He understood that he could refuse. Merlin let him refuse everything, which was the whole of why Harry would have walked into fire for him. And he understood that the refusing would be a small door quietly closing somewhere inside, a corner kept back, a coin withheld, the very thing that had left the seal a knot and not a weld. He held the pebble a moment longer. Then he went to the hearth, and he did not throw it, because throwing is a kind of taking turned backward, a getting rid. He knelt, and he set the pebble into the silver flame the way you lay something down that mattered, and he gave it freely, and he did not ask the fire for anything in return, and he meant it, all the way down, and it cost him, and the cost was the point. The fire took the pebble and turned it slowly to a clean small light, and lifted the light up among the drifting motes of the hall, where it joined them and was indistinguishable from them and was, Harry somehow knew, still his, more his now than when it had been a stone in his pocket, because a thing given freely is the only thing that can never be taken. Merlin watched the light rise and was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, in a voice with something carefully held out of it, "I could not do that at the end with the last coin there was to give. You have just done it with the only thing you owned at 7 because I asked. Mark this day, child. On the day that matters, you will need to remember that you already know how." It was after the matter of the ward and after the matter of the pebble, when Harry could hold stillness for the space of 100 breaths and ward a circle without grasping at it, that Merlin first took him down to look at the thing he would one day be asked to face. They did not go far. They could not. The deep beneath the deep was not a place you visited, Merlin said, the way you do not visit the inside of a dam by swimming up to the crack. They went only to the lowest gallery of the watchtower, a narrow shelf of black glass that ran along the top of an enormous dark, and there Merlin bade Harry sit and be still and listen and not, under any circumstance, reach. The dark below the shelf was not empty. Harry had learned by now the difference between an empty dark and an occupied one, as he had once learned the difference between his uncle's silences, and this dark was occupied the way a held breath is occupied, the way the inside of a fist is occupied. Far down past the edge of seeing there was a faint pale geometry, a vast lattice of the shell-colored metal and threaded silver, curved like the inside of an egg or the bars of a cage, and within the lattice something turned slowly with the patience Harry had felt come up through the floor on his first night, a patience that had nothing of peace in it and everything of appetite. "Listen to it," said Merlin, very low. "Not with your ears, with the thing the ears are a clumsy copy of. Tell me what it wants." Harry sat on the cold shelf and made himself deep water and let the dark below come to him instead of reaching for it, and after a long while he found that he could feel the shape of the wanting down there, and the shape of it turned his stomach, because it had no shape. Everything Harry had ever wanted had been a particular thing: a meal, a kind word, a day without the gang, the names of his mother and father. The wanting in the dark below wanted all of it and none of it. It did not want a meal, it wanted to have eaten everything. It did not want a kindness, it wanted to be the only thing left so that kindness would have no meaning. It wanted, Harry understood, sitting very still and going very cold, not anything at all but simply more, forever, the way a fire does not want this log or that log but only the next one and the next, world without end. "It's hungry," he whispered. But not for anything, just hungry, like it would eat being hungry if it ran out of everything else. "Yes," said Merlin, "now you have met it as much as you may safely meet it, and you will not forget the feel of it, and that is good, because the day will come when it wears a kinder face and tells you a sweeter story, and the only thing that will save you is the memory of what it felt like before it learned to lie to you. The wand folk who remember it at all remember a name and a few wicked tales. I knew it before it had a name. I will give you the name later when you are older and the name can do you more good than harm. A name is a handle, and you are not yet strong enough to be trusted with a handle on that. For now know it by what it is, the ever-wanting, the hunger that no amount can fill, because the wanting is the whole of it, and a wanting fed only grows. It is the oldest enemy there is. It was old when the first witch struck the first clean fire, and I did not defeat it, child. I want you to hear that plainly from me before some flatterer tells you otherwise. I bound it. There is all the difference in creation between the two. What's the difference? To defeat a thing you must be stronger than it in the thing's own coin, and the ever-wanting's coin is taking, and nothing alive can outtake a hunger that is made of taking. The more you take from it, the more you teach it, the more you feed the very thing you fight. I learned this the hard way, with a country bleeding behind me and the better part of my friends already in the ground. You cannot outtake it, so I did the other thing. I made it a promise it could not break, because it was made of the one substance it cannot touch. Do you understand yet what the seal is built of?" Harry looked down at the pale lattice in the dark, the same shell-colored metal as the door, as the basin, as the cool hand that had eased his fingers open. "Giving," he said. "It's all giving. Promises freely like the ward, that's why it can hold. It can't take the seal apart because the seal isn't a thing it can grab. Just so. The goblins forged the metal, and I and a great many braver people poured ourselves into the binding freely, holding nothing back, and the freely given cannot be unmade by the grasping, any more than you can steal a gift that has already been given. It will hold against any amount of pulling. But—" And here Merlin's light dimmed, and the old country of his face went still in the way Harry had learned meant a true and heavy thing was coming. "There is one flaw in it, and it is my flaw, and it is the reason you exist, and I will not hide it from you. The freely given holds forever only if it was given fully. And I, at the end, with my hands shaking and the dark coming up and a life's worth of being needed sitting on me like a second skin, could not give the last of it. I held back one thing. The smallest thing, myself. I bound the ever-wanting with everything I had except the one coin I could not, at the very last, bring myself to spend, which was my own going. I should have spent myself entirely into the seal and let myself be unmade in the making of it. I did not. I kept a corner of myself back and built this watchtower around the corner and called it prudence, and told myself an heir could finish what I had begun. The truth, child, the truth I have had 1,000 years alone in the dark to arrive at is plainer and worse. I would not die all the way. And because of that one withheld coin, the seal is a knot and not a weld, and a knot comes loose, and someone someday will have to do what I would not, give the last of themselves freely and finish the binding the only way it can be finished. The gallery was very quiet. Below them the ever-wanting turned in its cage of gifts, pulling, patient, eternal. "You want me to die," said Harry. He did not say it the way a grown person would have, who would first have wrapped it in dignity. He said it the way a child says the thing the adults are talking around plainly to see if it is true. "No," said Merlin, and the word came out of him with a force that had nothing soft in it. "I want you to live. I want it more than I have wanted anything in 1,000 years, and I am the one who taught you that wanting a thing is the surest way to lose it, so you may judge how far past my own rules my care for you has carried me. Hear me, I do not know that the price must be paid the way I failed to pay it. I was one tired old man at the end of everything, with no teacher, no time, and no one beside me who loved me enough to make me brave. You will have all three. There may be another way. The old art is deeper than my single failure, and you have already found one rule I never gave you, which makes me hope you will find others I never dreamed. I am not raising you to be a sacrifice. I am raising you to be the one person in the world who walks into that dark with his eyes open, knowing exactly what it costs and exactly what it is, and free to find a better answer than a tired old man could find alone. That is not the same as sending you to die. It is the opposite. It is the only thing I know that might let you live." The heir of Merlin received his first visitor on a day that began like the others and stopped being like the others when a door opened that Harry had never been shown. He was in the practice chamber, warding circles to settle his hands after the gallery, when a section of the wall that he had always taken for solid black glass swung inward on a hinge of the pale metal, releasing a breath of air that smelled of cold iron and green oil and the particular mineral dark of a place very far underground. And through it, ducking the low lintel with the unhurried dignity of one who has ducked 10,000 low lintels and resents every one, came a goblin. He was shorter than Harry, which Harry had not expected, and built like something the hill itself might have decided to make, broad and weighted and entirely unbothered by it. He wore a coat of dark stuff sewn with small clasps of the shell-colored metal, and at his belt a long knife in a flat case, and he carried himself the way the suits of armor in the great hall carried themselves, as though sleep had been a brief interruption to important business. His eyes went around the chamber once, missing nothing, pricing everything, and came to rest on Harry with the flat, appraising patience of a man reading a ledger he has waited 400 years to open. "You will be the heir," said the goblin. It was not a question, and it was not warm, and it had under it a dry rasp of something that might, in 400 more years, consider becoming humor. "You are smaller than the debt led me to expect. The debt is 1,000 years old and weighs accordingly. You weigh, I should estimate, 4 stone in wet boots. This is the trouble with prophecy and compact alike. They never specify the size of the hand, and one arrives prepared for a giant and is met by a damp child warding circles on the floor like a kitten chasing string. "I'm not chasing it," said Harry with dignity, getting to his feet. "I'm settling my hands, and the circles hold. You can stand on one if you want." The goblin looked at him. And he crossed to the nearest ward, the one Harry had laid that morning, and set one heavy boot upon it, deliberately, with the air of a building inspector who fully expects to be filing a complaint. The ward held, warmth in, cold out, a hand's breadth high, exactly as promised, taking the goblin's weight as though weight were beside the point, which it was. Something shifted very slightly in the goblin's flat appraisal. "Clean work," he admitted, in the tone of a man parting with a coin against his religion. "Asked, not imposed, goblin clean very nearly, which from a wizard I did not expect to say in my lifetime, and I have had a great many of them." He stepped off the ward. "I am Carrick, keeper of the deep records of the goblin nation, 8th of my name to hold the green lamp, and I have come up the forge road, which has not been walked in 1,000 years and is in disgraceful repair, to honor a debt that your wizards above have spent that same 1,000 years agreeing to forget. You will not have heard of it, they never do, so I will tell you plainly in the only language that has ever held a contract together, which is the language of exactly what is owed to whom. There is no need for the forge road's condition to be laid at my door, keeper," said a voice of light from the doorway, warm and very old, "considering that I am the one who sealed it, and considering further that I remember your grandfather's grandfather standing precisely where you stand now and complaining, in those identical tones, about the state of my hospitality. Carrick turned and saw Merlin, and the chronicler records that for the first time since he had come up out of the green dark, the keeper of the deep records was, very briefly, caught off his guard. He recovered with the speed of his profession. He inclined his head exactly the correct number of degrees, the bow of one sworn party to another across a contract that outranked them both. Meadin wilt, said Carrick. The ledger said you were a letter now. It did not say the letter would be insolent. The ledger has always undersold me, said Merlin. Keeper, you are welcome, which is more than I said to most who came down my stair, and you are owed, which I say to no one else living. Sit, there is food such as a dead man can summon, and there is a great deal to settle, and the child has earned the right to hear all of it, because he is the one it will fall upon. They settled. And Carrick opened his flat case and drew out the writ, the fair copy of the compact sealed in the pale metal that no wizard charm could alter, and he read it aloud in full, because that was how it was done, every clause of it, the forging and the binding and the watch and the debt. And Harry, who had been taught by a cupboard to listen very carefully when adults discussed what was owed, listened very carefully and understood, by the end of the reading, three things that rearranged his small world a fourth time. The first was that he was not, after all, entirely alone in this, and never had been. That under the green hills of Britain, an entire patient nation had been keeping faith with his unmade future for 10 centuries, dusting a debt against the day his hand should come. The second was that the goblins did not love him, and did not pretend to, and would never lie to him about it, and that this, after a lifetime of warmth pitched 1 degree too high, was the most restful thing he had ever been offered. An ally who would stand by him not out of feeling, which curdles, but out of honor, which is forged and holds. And the third was the clause that Carrick read last and slowest, the one written in the blood of a king and a wizard both, the clause that named the heir of Merlin a friend of the goblin nation, owed the truth, owed the forge, and owed the axe. Owed the axe, Harry repeated. What does that mean? It means, said Carrick, folding the writ with the care of a man handling the only honest thing in a dishonest world, that when the day comes that you stand against the thing in the dark below us, and the wizards above you are busy as wizards are always busy, arguing over who shall be seen to help while no one helps, the goblin nation will not be arguing. We do not forget debts, we forge that seal. Our honor is poured into it beside this old letter's craft. When it fails, child, and it will fail, you will not face what comes out of it with only a dead man's advice and your own 4 stone and wet boots. You will have a blade of the nation at your side, and the blade will be mine because I am the keeper, and the debt is mine to discharge, and I find, having met you, that I would rather discharge it standing next to you than read about how it went in a ledger written by someone who survived. He bared his teeth, and this time it was unmistakably the goblin version of a smile, which is a fearsome thing and entirely sincere. Also, you keep a clean ward. I have low standards for wizards, and you have already exceeded every one of them. Do not let it go to your head. The head is where wizards keep their ruin. There is a thing you should know, Carrick said when the food was gone and the writ was put away, and it is the reason I came up now and not in some more convenient century. The forge road runs close beneath your green hill before it drops to the deep, and I did not walk it in peace. There are wizards on top of the seal. There have been for a fortnight of your above days. They cannot get in by the door, which pleases me, and so they have begun in the way of people who cannot open a thing to consider breaking it, which does not please me at all. Merlin's light had gone very still. Tell me what you saw. I saw, through the stone, the shapes of a working being assembled, said Carrick. Slow, expensive, the kind a wand folk lord pays for and a wand folk ministry pretends not to notice. They have brought breakers, the sort that crack the old tombs for the trinkets inside, and they have been laying lines on the turf above, sounding the hill, looking for the weak place to put their lever. They will not find the door has no weak place. But a seal 1,000 years old has one child, I need not tell you which, for you have stood on the shelf above it and felt it pull. They are digging toward the very flaw this old letter confessed to you. They think there is treasure under the hill. They are correct in the way that a man is correct who has found, by digging idly in his garden, the lid of a very deep well full of something that has been waiting a long time to be let out. It came that night, by the reckoning below, though night and day were only words there. It did not announce itself. The first sign was the silver fire in the great hall, which guttered all at once, the way a candle leans toward a door opened in a far room, and the wheel of 12 lamps above the cold hearth, which had been counting its patient count for a year, stopped. Then the floor said a word. Harry felt it through the soles of his feet, as he had felt the first bell on his first night, but lower now and longer and wrong, a sound like a knot of rope giving up one of its turns, a deep fibrous parting somewhere beneath the deep. The pale lattice in the dark below, Harry knew without being shown, had lost a strand. Above, men with levers had found the flaw and leaned on it, not knowing what they leaned toward. Below, the ever-wanting had felt the lean and pulled once hard into the new slack, and the freely given seal, which could not be broken by taking, had been pried by taking just far enough to let a single finger of the thing inside reach out. The cold came up the gallery stair like water finding the shape of a stair. It was not the clean cold of the deep hall, the cold that Harry had learned to ward against. It was a cold with a direction and an attention, a cold that wanted, and it came into the great hall of the watchtower, and the drifting motes of light shrank away from it and went out where it passed, leaving behind them a darkness that the watchtower had not held in 1,000 years. Where the cold touched the carved walls, the long story went dark and silent in its wake. The stags stopped their running, the wolves their endless circling beneath the cut moon, the figures with their crowns and their laid-down crowns all stilled at once, 1,000 years of told tale holding its breath as the thing that had been bound at the end of the story reached, for the first time since the carving of it, back up into the light. "It has found the slack the levers gave it," Merlin said without turning, and his voice had the flatness of a man reading the one outcome he had spent his death trying to prevent. "Not far, a finger, it cannot fit more through so small a wound, but a finger of it is enough to lie with, and lying is the part of it I taught you to fear before I taught you anything else." Carrick's knife was in his hand without the chronicler having seen him draw it. Merlin had risen, and the light of him had gone hard and tall and white, filling the hall, a wall of the old enormous purpose standing between the cold and the child. And in the cold, very faint, very sweet, pitched, Harry noticed, with the part of him that had spent a year learning to notice, exactly 1 degree too warm, a voice spoke. It did not roar. The thing that had felt like a bottomless hunger on the gallery shelf did not roar. It had learned, somewhere in 1,000 years of pulling, to be gentle, and the gentleness was the most dangerous sound Harry had ever heard. "There you are," it said, and it said it the way no one had ever said it to Harry, as he had lain in the cupboard at night imagining someone might one day say it, low and welcoming and sure, the voice of a thing that has been looking everywhere for you because you matter. "Little one. Little open hand, they keep you down here in the dark and they call it teaching. They are using you, child, the dead one and the gold one both, the way the ones above used you, the way everyone has always used you. I would not use you, I would give you everything you have ever been refused. Only come a little closer and tell me your name." Harry stood behind the white wall of Merlin's light, with Carrick's blade at his side and a year of stillness in him, and his own deduced rule ringing quietly in his chest, and he looked at the sweet patient cold that was offering him, in a voice pitched 1 degree too warm, the exact shape of every hunger he had carried up and down the stair. And he understood with the cold certainty of a child who has finally met the thing the adults were talking around, that this was the kinder face Merlin had promised would come, arriving years too early, because men with levers had opened the door of its cage a finger's width. He did not tell it his name. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, those who would seize at the cold that wore a kind voice waited for an answer, and when the answer did not come it stopped for the length of a breath, being kind. That was the moment Harry understood it best and would remember longest, not the sweetness, which was a costume, but the instant the costume slipped, when the warmth went out of the voice like heat out of a corpse, and what remained underneath was the appetite from the gallery shelf, the thing that wanted everything and nothing, looking out through a finger's width of its own broken cage at the one warm living point in the hall that had declined to give it a name to hold. "You will," said the cold, and it was not warm now at all. "They all do in the end. A name is such a small thing to give, and you have given so much already to people who never asked. Why not to me, who asks so nicely?" "Because you want it," said Harry. The simplicity of it seemed to check the thing briefly, the way a closed door checks a hand reaching in the dark. Harry stood behind the white wall of Merlin's light, with Carrick's blade gleaming at his hip and a year of stillness holding his small frame upright, and he said the rest of it not to wound the cold, but because it was simply true, the way the pebble under the cup had been true. "Everything that ever wanted something from me wanted to take it. Merlin's the only one who ever gave me things and didn't want anything back, and you said he was using me, which is how I know you're the liar, because the giving is the part you can't do. You can only want, I worked it out, you can't take a name, you can only be given one. And I'm not giving you anything because giving you something would mean he stopped, because the working was already moving in him, the rule he had bled for on the practice floor turning itself the right way round, and he did not finish the sentence in words. He finished it in the old art. He took the warmth in his own chest, the small steady fire that a year of being held by a kind chair and an old man of light had finally let him build there, and he did not hurl it at the cold, because hurling is taking turn backward. He gave it freely into the wound in the seal, into the finger's width of dark, as he had given the pebble to the fire, expecting nothing, meaning it all the way down. And the freely given went where the grasping could not follow, into the very crack the levers had pried, and it did not burn the cold and it did not push the cold, it filled the slack. It gave the prying nothing left to pull against. The finger of dark recoiled with a sound like indrawn breath reversed, and the wound in the seal, a hand's breadth lower in the deep, drew very slightly closed, not healed, never healed, but narrowed by exactly the warmth a 7-year-old had to give. It cost him. Of course it cost him. He had given, and giving is spending, and Harry went to his knees on the black glass with the hall tilting around him and the fire in his chest guttered down to an ember, and his hands gone the gray of old ash. and it cost Merlin more because the wound was too wide for a child's small warmth to close alone, and the old letter did the thing he had spent 1,000 years rationing himself against. He spent. The white wall of his light bent down into the crack behind Harry's gift and poured, and a measure of the preserved consciousness that was all that remained of the greatest wizard who ever lived went out of the hall forever, sealed into the narrowing wound, and the carved walls dimmed by a degree that did not come back, and 3 of the 12 lamps on the wheel did not relight when the cold had gone. The cold went. The finger withdrew through the wound to the patient dark below, defeated of nothing it could not afford to lose, having learned only the one thing it had come to learn, which was the temperature of the new warmth in the hall and the precise shape of the hand that would not feed it. For a while no one moved. The hall, which had held its breath for 1,000 years, and then for one terrible minute more, let it slowly out. The drifting motes that the cold had snuffed came back by 2s and 3s, relighting the dark, though fewer than before, and along the great carved walls the long story crept back into motion, the stags resuming their frozen run, the wolves their circling, the bound figure at the end of the tail sinking once more out of the light it had reached toward. Harry watched the carving heal itself and could not feel his fingers. Carrick reached him first. The goblin went down on one knee in the spreading gray of the floor, took Harry's ashen hand in both of his hard ones and turned it over, examining it with the brisk, impersonal competence of a smith inspecting a tool that has been overworked. "Spent," he pronounced, "not broken. There is a difference, and you will learn to feel it, and you will learn to stop short of it, because a tool that empties itself to the last drop is a tool that does not come home, and I have not filed 1,000-year debt to watch its answer pour itself dry in the first skirmish." He produced, from somewhere in his coat, a flat, dark cake of something that smelled of iron and honey, broke off a corner, put it into Harry's gray hand, and closed the fingers round it. "Eat, goblin road bread. It will not love you, but it will not lie to you either, which is more than the green world's food can say." Harry ate. The bread was dense and strange and tasted of deep places, and warmth came back into him slowly, from the stomach outward, the way feeling returns to a cold hand held near a fire. Across the hall in the chair of pale roots, Merlin sat very still, dimmer by 3 lamps and a measure of himself that would not return, and watched the goblin feed the child, and something passed over the old country of his face that the chronicler will not name, because it was not arranged for anyone, and because Harry, busy with the bread, did not see it. 1,000 years I held that wound alone," Merlin said at last, to no one, to the hall, to the deep. "Tonight a child and a goblin held it with me. I had forgotten what that was worth. I had forgotten, I think, on purpose, because remembering it was the one ache I could not afford down here in the dark by myself." The silver fire steadied, the hall held, and Harry knelt on the floor of the world with ash for hands, and Carrick crouched beside him with the blade still ready, and Merlin, smaller now, dimmer now, sat down very slowly in his chair of pale roots, a letter with 3 of its pages spent. "Now," said Merlin, when the breath had come back into all of them, "you have earned the name. Not as a handle. I will not give you a handle on it yet. You are not strong enough, and after that you are weaker still. As a warning, so that when it next puts on a face you will know whose face it is wearing. The thing in the dark below us, child, the ever-wanting, the hunger I bound and could not unmake, had a name in the green world once, before it became only hunger, when it still wore the shape of a woman and walked among kings and was, the chronicler of that age would have told you, the cleverest and most beautiful and most starved soul in Britain. The wan folk remember her on the little cards they trade and the tales they tell to hushed children. They call her Morgan Le Fay." Harry knew the name as he had known Merlin's, dimly, from the wrong stories. "The witch from the King Arthur cartoon," he said. "The bad one." "The bad one," Merlin agreed, with a thread of the old wryness surviving in his diminished light. "How history flattens us all. Yes, the bad one, though she did not begin bad, which is the part the cards leave off, because a card has no room for the truth, and the truth is the only thing that might teach you to survive her. She began hungry. She was born into a world that fed her brothers and starved her, that praised her cleverness and gave her nothing to spend it on, that wanted from her endlessly and gave back, to a soul as vast as any king's, precisely nothing. And the wanting in her, child, the great unfed wanting, went looking for a way to fill itself and found the old art, and made of it the one thing the old art forbids. She learned to take. She got very good at it. She took strength, and then years, and then other people's years, and then the taking became the whole of her, and the woman fell away from inside it the way a fruit falls away from a wasp, until there was nothing left in that beautiful shape but the appetite itself, deathless, because you cannot starve a hunger to death, you can only feed it or bind it, and I would not feed her, so I bound her, and it cost me a country and my friends and my youth, and at the very end my nerve." The hall was silent. Below, the bound hunger that had once been a starved, clever girl turned in its cage of gifts, narrowed by a child's warmth, waiting with the only patience it had left. "She is why the door is built the way it is," Merlin said softly. "She is why it opens to need without greed. I made the lock in her image and reversed. She could never have passed it because she was all wanting, and so I built a door that only the empty hand could open, knowing that whoever the door someday chose would be, by the door's own measure, her exact opposite. You child, you are what I built the door to find. You are the answer to Morgan Le Fay. And I am sorry, I am so sorry, because no one should be made the answer to anything at 7 years old, and I have gone and made you one, and the only mercy I can offer is that I did not choose you. She did. By being everything you are not, she shaped, across 1,000 years, the precise size of the hand that could undo her, and the door went out into the green world and found the hand, and it was holding nothing, and it was missing a shoe. They did not sleep after. There was no profit in it. The wound below was narrowed but not closed, and what had narrowed it was a child's whole warmth and 3 of a dead man's pages, and those were not commodities the hall could afford to spend nightly. They sat by the steadied fire and reckoned, the way people reckon after a near thing, in the flat, unhurried voices that come once the shaking is done. The finger came through the slack the levers gave it, said Carrick, who had cleaned his blade and put it away and now sat with his flat case open on his knees, the writ of the compact spread upon it. Stop the levers and you starve the wound of new slack. The thing below can pull all it likes against a seal that no one is helping it pry. It has pulled for 1,000 years and gained a finger. It is the diggers that turn 1,000-year nibble into a season's breach, so we stop the diggers. You cannot go up against them, said Merlin. A goblin blade among wizards on the green surface is a war, and a war is a banquet laid for exactly the kind of hunger we are trying to starve. She would feed on it, no. I had not proposed the blade, said Carrick, with the patience of a creditor explaining interest to a child. I had proposed the law. The site is named in a compact older than their ministry, sealed in the blood of a king they have forgotten and a wizard they mythologize. By that compact the ground above the holodet is under treaty protection of the goblin nation, and any working laid upon it without the nation's leave is a breach of treaty, actionable, and the wand folk, whatever their faults, will not cross their own paperwork. I will go to their bank, which is my bank, and I will file the compact, and I will make it very expensive and very public for any lord to keep digging on ground the goblins have posted. It will not stop a determined enemy. It will stop a greedy one, which Malfoy is, because greed is cautious where it is not certain of profit. It buys us time. Time is the only thing this place has ever traded in. And the child, said Merlin. The child, said Carrick, should go up into the green world and be a child for an hour or two, by the wheel's reckoning, because he has just given away the only thing he owned and the whole of his warmth in the same week, and a tool spent and never rested is a tool that breaks, and I do not invest in tools that break. He closed the case. The dry rasp in his voice did not soften, but it bent, very slightly. The way iron bends before it admits it is warm. Also he is 7 and has been underground a year of days and should see the sky. That is not in the compact. I include it gratis. Do not tell the director. So it was decided that Harry would go up, and before he went, Merlin called him close, and the spending of the herald fight showed in the old letter now, in the dimness of him, in the 3 dark lamps on the wheel, and Harry minded it more than he minded his own ashen hands. Listen to me, Merlin said, because this is a lesson I cannot teach you twice and may not after tonight have the pages to teach you once. There is a man up there. The goblins call him the director's nuisance, and the ministry calls him the greatest wizard of the age, and the children call him headmaster, and his name is Albus Dumbledore, and he is, mark this, a good man. I do not warn you against a villain. A villain is easy. A villain wants what you can see he wants. I warn you against a good man who has decided, for the best of reasons, across a long and much burdened life, that he is the one who must hold the world's heaviest things, because he trusts no other hands, not even in the end mine. He will be kind to you. He will mean it. Every single thing he says to you will be true, and every single thing he says to you will also be a lever. And the terrible part, child, the part that will take you years to see, is that he does not always know himself which it is, because in him the kindness and the lever have grown into the same root. How do I know which it is? Said Harry. If it's both, you already know how, said Merlin. You learned it with the cups. You do not watch his hands are kindness, and they are very good hands, and they will hold your whole attention while the working happens somewhere you are not looking. You watch the table. You watch what moves while he is being warm at you. You watch whose choices get smaller every time he is generous, and if the answer is yours, then you will know that the generosity was the cup and the taking was under it, no matter how much he loves you, and he may very well come to love you, which will make it harder, not easier. Be kind back. He has earned kindness. The wounds that made him are real, but give him nothing you have not decided in the stillness to give. The empty hand opened my door, child. Keep it empty by choice now and not by theft, and you will be the one person in 100 years that Albus Dumbledore cannot move. Harry took that up the stair with him, turning it over as he had once turned the pebble he no longer had, and the hill opened to his hand and let him out into the green world. And the green world was waiting for him, in purple robes, sitting on an upturned crate by the rusted fence as though he had all the time there had ever been. Good afternoon, said Albus Dumbledore. He did not rise, which Harry noticed, and understood after a moment to be a courtesy rather than its absence. A very tall old man unfolding to his full height over a small one is a kind of pressure, and this old man had chosen deliberately to meet him at the height of a child sitting on a crate, which was either the kindest thing a stranger had ever done for Harry or the first move in a game, and Harry, schooled by a year in a cupboard, suspected it was both at once. "You've been waiting for me," Harry said. "I have been waiting," Dumbledore agreed, "for whoever the hill would let out, which I had reasoned must be whoever it had let in, the two being, in the matter of doors, generally the same person. I confess I had pictured someone taller." His eyes, very blue behind the half-moon spectacles, moved over Harry once, mildly, the way a kind grandfather looks at a grandchild who has grown, and then they stopped, and something happened behind them that the twinkle was a half-second too slow to cover, a stillness, a recalculation, the small seismic quiet of a man who has just recognized a face he himself filed away 6 years before on a doorstep in the dark. "Although," he said, and his voice did not change at all, which was itself the tell, "I find I had pictured the right person after all." "Hello, Harry, you know me," said Harry. It was not a question. The cups had taught him that the interesting thing was never the card the trickster turned over with a flourish, it was the one he had not meant you to see him glance at. "I knew your mother and father," said Dumbledore, and there it was, exactly as Merlin had promised, a true thing, warm and weighted, laid down on the grass between them like a gift, and Harry felt the pull of it, the awful sweet pull, because here at last was a person who had known the two faces Merlin could not give him. And Harry stood in the pull of it and made himself deep water and watched, not the gift, but the hand that had set it down, and saw that the hand had set it down on purpose first, before anything else, the way you lead with your strongest card. I knew them very well. They were brave and they were good, and they loved you more than their own lives, which they proved, and I have thought of you every day since, and wished I could have given you the home you deserved, and watched over you in the ways an old man can from a distance." Every word of it was true. Harry could feel that it was true, as he could feel the name of Stone. James and Lily Potter had been brave and good and had loved him, and the old man on the crate had wished it otherwise and had watched. And every word of it was also a lever, laid one atop the next with the patience of a man building a small warm staircase down into a child who had been starved of exactly this. And the staircase led, Harry saw, watching the table, to a single destination, which was that Harry should feel he owed this kind weary old man something, should feel that the debt of a watched-over orphan was now gently called. "You let them put me in the cupboard," Harry said. The afternoon went very quiet. Somewhere over the fence a lawnmower droned and stopped. Dumbledore's expression did not move, and that not moving was the steel, the thing under the grandfather, the thing that did not flinch even when a child set the one true sentence on the grass that the whole warm staircase had been built to walk him past. "I did not know about the cupboard," said Dumbledore at last, and this too was true, and was also not the point, and the smallest part of him, the honest part he kept under all the strategy, knew it was not the point. "I knew you were not cherished. I judged the protection of your mother's blood worth a childhood that was less than you deserved. I have made many such judgments, Harry. It is the particular curse of being trusted with large things that you must spend small ones to keep them, and the small ones are always somebody, and the somebody is always real, and one tells oneself it is for the greater good, and one is sometimes even right, which is the worst of it. You have every reason to hold it against me. I would think less of you if you did not, but I did not come here to be forgiven. I came because you have walked into something far older and far more dangerous than a cupboard, and there is no one else alive who knows what waits beneath that hill, and you are 7 years old, and I am, whatever my sins against you, the only person in Britain who can help you carry it." It was, Harry thought, watching the table, beautifully done. It was so beautifully done that he could see exactly how a lonelier child, a child who had not spent a year being given things by someone who wanted nothing, would have walked straight down the warm staircase and into the offered arms and been from that moment gently and lovingly and permanently held. Owned, the most dangerous staircase in Britain, built by a good man who believed every word. "You don't know what's under the hill," Harry said. "Not really. You know a name and some stories. You tried the door and it wouldn't open for you." He watched that land, and it landed. The twinkle held, but a muscle moved beside the old man's eye, the smallest acknowledgement that the child had turned over a card no one had shown him. "It wouldn't open because you wanted it. That's what the door's for. It only opens for someone who isn't trying to take. So you can't help me carry it, not really, because the whole thing is made out of not taking, and you've spent your whole life taking small somebodies for big reasons, and the hill can smell it on you. I'm not being cheeky. Merlin said you were a good man. He also said good men who decide they're the only safe hands are the most dangerous thing there is, because they never know when they're being kind and when they're being a lever, on account of in them it's the same root." He stopped. He had said more than he meant to, the way children do, but he did not take it back because it was true, and the air down below had taught him that the air keeps things. For a long moment Albus Dumbledore looked at the small ashen-handed child standing in front of him, quoting a dead man's verdict on his soul with the artless accuracy that only a child or a god can manage. And the chronicler will report that of all the things that happened in that field, this was the one that frightened him, not because the verdict was cruel, but because it was correct and had come out of the mouth of a 7-year-old he had personally arranged to be small and starved and easy to save. And the arranging had failed. The child was not easy to save. The child had been got to first by a teacher who gave instead of taking, and Albus Dumbledore understood, sitting on an upturned crate in a Surrey field, that the most important piece on his board had been quietly removed from his reach by the one rival he could not out-scheme, because the rival had been dead for 1,000 years and had spent the whole of that death learning patience. "He taught you well," said Dumbledore softly, and there was something in it under the steel that was almost, the chronicler thinks, something like ease, the strange ease of a tired master who meets at last a student he cannot move and finds that a corner of him does not mind. "Merlin always did give better than he took. It was his great flaw, your teacher, and apparently his great gift. Very well, Harry. I will not pretend I have not lost something here today, because you would see the pretense, and I find I do not wish to be seen lying to you twice, but understand me." And now he did rise, unfolding to his full great height at last, not as a pressure but as a fact, a tall old man against the lowering sky with 1,000 losses and 1,000 victories in the lines of his face. "Whatever you think of my methods, the thing beneath that hill is real, and it is waking, and when it is fully awake it will not care which of us was right about you. There are others who will come for what you carry, and they will not lead with the truth as I have. I will be watching. When the day comes that you need the only living man who has read what waits down there, you will find I am closer than you think. That is not a lever. It is a promise, and the difference, Harry, is something you and I will have years to argue about." Whatever Harry might have answered was taken from him by the arrival of a carriage that made no sound, and a voice that made a great deal of it. "Headmaster, and in such charming company." Lucius Malfoy crossed the waste ground exactly as he had crossed it 2 weeks before, permitting nothing to mark him, his cane swinging, his pale eyes going at once to the small figure beside Dumbledore and then, with the swift arithmetic of a man who has spent a fortune to learn precisely this, to the rusted fence and the green mound behind it and back to the child, and arriving, visibly, at the sum. "How very paternal of you to counsel a muggle stray in a field. Though I wonder that you trouble yourself, when the matter has grown so plainly to concern the heritage of us all." He inclined his head a precise degree to Harry. "The bow one gives a valuable object one intends shortly to acquire. And who is this remarkable child that a hill no wizard in Britain can open should open for him?" "A pupil," said Dumbledore pleasantly, "of a school that has not yet had the honor of enrolling him. You are some way out of your district, Lucius." "I had understood the Board of Governors met on Thursdays." "The board takes its duties wherever heritage is imperiled," said Lucius, "and I have heard, through channels a man in my position cannot help but keep, that there was an event beneath this hill last night, a great working, a breach, some say." His gaze slid over Harry the way a hand slides over a coin to judge its weight. "A child who can open the lost door of Merlin is not a muggle stray, headmaster. He is a national asset, and assets in unsettled times require proper guardianship, responsible guardianship, the kind a great and ancient family is uniquely placed to provide." He smiled, and it was a good smile, the practiced warmth pitched, Harry noted, with the part of him that had learned the herald's exact degree, fully 2 degrees too high. "The child is plainly neglected. Look at his hands. The ministry would surely agree that his welfare, and the welfare of what he carries, would be better served in the care of a household equipped to nurture so rare a gift." "The ministry," said a new voice, dry as old parchment, "agrees to nothing it has not first scheduled." And Bartemius Crouch came across the grass with the air of a man arriving at a meeting he intends to chair. "And it certainly does not agree to the private guardianship of a magical site of the first importance by a member of its own board with a documented interest in acquiring rare objects. This ground is now a matter of departmental concern, Lucius, which means it is mine, and the child, whoever he is a witness to an unregistered event, which also means he is mine, and you will both kindly stop arranging his future as though he were a parcel." "He is not a parcel," agreed a fourth voice, and it came from low down and to the side, from a square heavy figure that none of the 3 great wizards had heard approach, because goblins, when they wish it, are not heard. Carrick stepped into the middle of the gathering and looked up at the assembled eminence of magical Britain with the flat professional eye of a creditor who has found the debtors quarreling over the deceased's furniture before the body is cold. "He is a friend of the goblin nation, named and sealed in compact, and that, my lords, changes the arithmetic of this field entirely, and I shall now explain to you precisely and at length how." He opened his flat case. He produced the writ in the pale metal, and he held it up so that the lowering light ran along the unalterable letters, and he spoke into the silence of 3 men who had, each of them, spent a career learning that there was exactly one thing worse than one another, which was a document they had not seen coming. "This ground," said Carrick, "is under treaty protection of the Goblin Nation by a compact older than your ministry, your board, and your school, sealed in the blood of a king. Any working laid upon it without the nation's leave, my Lord Malfoy, such as the excavation your hired breakers have conducted these past 2 weeks, is a breach of treaty, and the nation will be filing for restitution at a rate of compound interest that I have personally calculated, and the figure is educational. And this child, my lords all, is named in that same compact as a friend of the nation, which means that any wizard who lays a hand upon him to remove him, guardian or ministry or schoolmaster, without his freely given consent, breaches the treaty a second time, and the Goblin Nation does not, historically, confine its responses to paperwork." He bared his teeth. "I do so like explaining the law, one meets such interesting reactions." It was a beautiful thing to watch, and Harry watched all of it, deep water, the cups laid out on the largest table he had ever seen. He watched Lucius recalculate, the greed going cautious the instant the profit went uncertain, exactly as Carrick had foretold. A man who would dig up a god for treasure would not start a goblin war for a child he could not be sure of keeping. He watched Crouch's jaw work, the rules in him at war with the rules in the writ, a man of law cornered by an older law and unable to move against it. And he watched Dumbledore, who alone of the three was not caught out, who had known the goblins kept the holodebt because Dumbledore knew everything, and who looked down at Carrick with something that was almost respect and at Harry with something that was harder to name, the look of a chess player who has just watched a piece he thought he had lost stand up on the board, brush itself off, and acquire from nowhere a guard. "It seems," said Dumbledore mildly into the ringing quiet, "that the child is rather better defended than any of us intended. I find I do not entirely mind." And he looked at Harry over the heads of the men who would seize him and inclined his head, the small private salute of one strategist to another across a board that had just grown a great deal more interesting. And the steel was still in him, and the kindness was still in him, and the two were still the same root, and would be for years. "We will speak again, Harry, when there is less of an audience. You have my word, for whatever a good man's word is worth to a child who has learned to weigh it. And you, keeper, will find the school remembers its old courtesies to the nation, whatever the bank may say of Thursdays. They went in the end the way the great always go from a field they cannot win in, slowly, and with the last word each, and watching one another's backs." Lucius's carriage took him off toward whatever drawing-room would next receive his charitable interest in heritage. Crouch left orders, to no one in particular, that the site be warded and logged and that he be informed, and departed to file the kind of report that fortifies a man's claim without committing him to a fight. Dumbledore was simply between one blink and the next, not there in the way of him, leaving behind only the upturned crate and the sense of a conversation deferred rather than ended. Carrick remained a moment by the fence in the failing light. "You did well," he said, which from a goblin is a sentence carved on monuments. "You watched the table, you let them quarrel over you without once letting them hold you. That is statecraft, child, and you are 7, and it is faintly indecent. Go down, rest. The compact is filed by now, my underkeeper will have seen to it. The diggers will pack up their levers within the week, because greed reads a balance sheet faster than honor reads a grave. You have bought time." He turned to go and paused and added, without turning round, in the tone of a man disowning the words even as he says them, "The sky was worth seeing. You should see it more. I shall note in the ledger that the air is owed a sky. It will confuse my successors for centuries." And he went away down the ordinary street, a small, heavy figure in the dusk, and Harry stood alone by the rusted fence with the whole strange day folded up inside him, and the green world going dark and ordinary around the most extraordinary hill in Britain. He went down because he was tired, and because below was the only place that had ever felt like going home, which was a thing he had not had words for until he had it, and which he was careful, even now, not to look at too directly, lest looking at it break it. The hill opened to his hand, the stair turned beneath him. And at the foot of it, in the great hall where 3 of the 12 lamps stood dark, and the silver fire burned lower than it had, the thing in the deep was waiting for him, and it had used the hours of his absence to think. "You came back," said the cold, through the narrowed wound, and it had learned in the day's quiet to be cleverer. It did not pitch itself 2 degrees too warm now, it pitched itself exactly right. It had studied him, it spoke in the voice of the one friend a solitary child invents and tells everything to. "I watched you up there, the gold one who wants to keep you, and the silver one who wants to sell you, and the little iron one with his papers, all of them reaching, none of them giving. You stood in the middle and you let them quarrel, and you were so alone, little open hand, so alone in the middle of all that wanting, and only I saw it. They want what you can do, I want you. There is a difference, and you of all souls know how to weigh it." Harry stood at the foot of the stair and did not answer, and made himself deep water, and the not answering was harder this time, because this time the cold had got the temperature right. "I could give them back," it went on, gentle, terrible, patient. "The 2 faces the dead man could not. I wore 1,000 faces before they bound me. I could wear theirs exactly, the voice, the warmth, the way your mother said your name. you would not be able to tell. That is not a threat, little one, that is an offer. I am the only thing in all the world large enough to give you the one thing you were robbed of, and all I ask, all I have ever asked, is that you let me out of the dark they put me in, the way they put you in your cupboard, you and I, child, the two starved, clever things this world locked away because it could not bear how much we were. And far below, the lower seal groaned. It was not the parting of a single strand this time. It was the long, sick complaint of a great structure taking strain, the pale lattice in the deep flexing under a pull that the day's digging had left it too slack to wholly refuse, and a fourth lamp on the wheel above the cold hearth guttered toward darkness and did not quite go out, and held there trembling on the edge. And Merlin's voice came from the chair of pale roots, dimmer than Harry had ever heard it, but upright still, refusing still, a letter with pages left to read. "Do not answer it, child," said the greatest wizard who ever lived, who had bound this thing once at the cost of everything and would not, even spent, even fading, let it have the last word in his own hall. "It cannot wear your mother's face unless you give it your mother's face, and you have never seen it, which is the one cruelty of your life that is, today, a mercy. It has nothing of you it was not handed. Keep the hand empty. The seal will hold a while yet. And tomorrow, child, we begin the last of your teaching, because the groan you just heard is the sound of the years we hoped for becoming the months we have." Harry looked at the four-lamp gap on the wheel, and the low silver fire and the dimmed shape of his teacher, and down the dark stair toward the deep where a starved clever thing turned in a cage of gifts and called him brother. And he did not answer the cold, and he did not give it a face, and he set his small empty hand against the cold glass of the wall, the asking hand, the one the door loved, and he made a promise to the hill as he had been taught freely, expecting nothing. That whatever it cost, he would not let it out. The hill heard him. Far below, the groaning eased by exactly the measure of one child's freely given word and held. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, the heir named the last of Harry's teaching went quickly, the way the end of everything goes quickly, gathering speed as it nears the edge the way water does before the fall it has been pretending all along it would not reach. Merlin had said months, and months it was by the cellar reckoning of the wheel, but they were not the unhurried months Merlin had hoped for in the early days, the long, patient years of a child grown carefully into his strength. They were the months of a teacher who has heard the seal groan and counted his own dark lamps and done the bitter arithmetic, and they were spent without waste. Harry learned to ward not a circle now but a room, then a hall, then, on one staggering afternoon, the whole of the great chamber, holding the promise of the stone in his small frame, until the sweat ran into his eyes, and the silver fire bent toward him the way a flame leans toward an open door. He learned the names of deeper things, of silence, which is not the absence of sound but a presence with a shape, of memory, which the stone keeps better than men do, of giving, which he had met first with a pebble and met now in 100 forms, until the giving of warmth and ward and word came as near to easy as such a thing ever comes to a living hand. There was one carving Merlin made him study until he could have drawn it with his eyes shut, and it was the very one Harry had halted before on his first night in the world below, before he knew a single name. The standing figure at the mouth of a cave, a star caught and blazing in one upraised hand, and the great formless dark pressed close against the light of it, held back by the narrowest of margins. "You could not walk past it that first night," Merlin said. "I will tell you now why, because you are far enough into the art to need it and young enough in your years that it may yet do you some good. That is no hero. The carvers flattered no one in this hall. The hall keeps the truth, and the truth is the only inheritance worth the name. That is me, child, at the binding at the very end, with the last light I had to give held up against the dark that had once been a starved, clever girl. Now mark how the star is held, not thrown. Not used as a weapon, for you cannot make a weapon of a gift, held up, offered. That is the whole of the old art in one cut stone." He let Harry look, with the new eyes the months had built in him, and Harry saw what the soft thousand-year edges had hidden, that the hand around the star was not quite open. One finger curled, a corner kept back. The carvers were kinder to me than I deserved, and crueler, for they left the finger, they left the proof. Star is offered freely in every part but one, and the one part is the reason the dark is only held and not undone, and the reason you are standing here, and the reason I must, before the end, ask of you the thing that figure could not do, which is to open the hand the whole way." He was quiet a moment. "When the hour comes, and it is coming, do not look to the heroes in the wan folks' tales who win by striking. Look to this, a hand lifted, a light offered, a finger that this time does not curl. The whole hall has been teaching you that since the night you could not walk past the stone, I think some part of you knew even then that the carving was a question and that you were its answer." And he learned, because Merlin would not let him not learn it, the thing he liked least, which was how the binding below was meant, in the end, to be renewed. "I have shown you the seal," Merlin said, on a day when 4 of the 12 lamps stood dark and a 5th wavered, "and I have shown you the flaw in it, which is mine, and I have told you the price it asks, which I would not pay. It is time I showed you the door between us, child, because a successor who does not understand exactly what he is succeeding to is not a successor. He is a victim with good manners. Sit, be still." And here the whole of it without the kindness I have wrapped the pieces in until now, because you have earned the unkindness of the truth entire, and there is no longer time to dole it out in spoonfuls. So Harry sat and was still, deep water now without trying, and heard the whole of it. The old art, Merlin told him, did not pass from teacher to pupil the way one craft did, by lessons and practice and the slow accretion of skill. It could be taught, the bones of it, the names and the stillness and the rule of giving. Harry had been taught those, and they were his, found and not given, words that would hold. But the deep grammar of it, the 1,000 years of it, the lived weight of every working Merlin had ever made and every mistake he had ever survived, the whole vast library of an elder age that lived now nowhere in all the world, but in the dimming light of one preserved consciousness at the bottom of a hill, that could not be taught. It could only be given, poured entire from the one vessel that still held it into the one vessel the door had judged fit to receive it, freely, holding nothing back. In a right the goblins had a name for and the wizards had forgotten, and Merlin called simply the inheritance. It will not make you me, Merlin said. Hear that clearly for your own protection and the world's. The right is not a possession, and I am not crawling into your skin to drive you like a cart, whatever the wild tales would have it. You will be wholly yourself, Harry Potter, the same child who watched the table and gave away his only stone, only you will have underneath the self the whole of the old art to draw on, the way a person has the whole of a language he cannot remember learning. It will be in you the way your mother's open hand is in you, not as a master, as an inheritance, and it will cost. His light dimmed further of its own accord, the way a man's voice drops when he comes to the part he has been walking toward all along. It will cost me everything I have left, which is little enough now, and which I have been hoarding the way I hoarded my last coin 1,000 years ago, and which I have at last decided to spend all of it freely into you and be done. The inheritance is the last working of Merlin. When it is finished, child, I am finished. There will be no more old man in the chair. There will be only you and what I gave you in a hall gone dark. Harry had known, the chronicler thinks, since the herald, since the 3 dark lamps, a watcher knows. But knowing a thing and hearing it laid out plain in the voice of the one person who had ever wanted nothing from him are 2 different weights, and the second is the heavier, and Harry sat under it for a long while before he could find anything to say, and what he found when he found it was not a grand thing, because Harry was 7, and the grand things are for people who have not actually lost anyone. I don't want you to, he said. I know, said Merlin. You could keep it, some of it. You could keep a corner back like before and stay and just teach me slower. And there it was, laid on the air between them. The very thing Merlin had done 1,000 years ago, the corner kept back, the coin withheld, offered now to Merlin by the child he had raised, out of love, as the easiest and most loving and most ruinous mistake there is. The old letter looked at the offer and looked at the child making it, and the chronicler will tell you that this was the hardest moment of Merlin's long death, harder than the binding, harder than the 1,000 years alone, because the thing that was being offered him was the one thing he had ever wanted, which was to be permitted to stay, to not have to give the last of himself, to be forgiven the very failure that had doomed the world to need a successor in the first place. And it was being offered by the one person whose love made the staying almost defensible. No, said Merlin gently, and it was the bravest word the chronicler has ever recorded him speaking. No, child, because that is exactly how this began. I kept a corner back, out of nothing worse than the wish to go on a little longer, and the corner became this hall, and the hall became 1,000 years of you not having parents, and the world not knowing how close it sleeps to hungry dark. I will not teach you the lesson of giving with my words and then unteach it with my death. You gave me your only stone when I asked. I will give you my only self when the hour asks, which is now, and I will not flinch from it twice, because the second flinch would unmake the first gift, and the first gift, Harry, the pebble in the fire, is the truest thing anyone has done in this hall in 1,000 years, and I will not be the one who teaches you it was foolish. The light gathered itself, dim and resolute. Will you receive it? I will not pour it into a hand that does not freely open. That is the one rule even I cannot break. You must choose to inherit, knowing it ends me, knowing it binds you, knowing what waits below, and that I will not be here to face it with you. Choose, child, and whatever you choose, know that I have already in the choosing of you been repaid for the whole of my long waiting. Harry was afraid. The chronicler sets the word down once plainly, because it is the only honest word, and because Harry himself would not have dressed it in anything finer. It was the kind that comes to a child at the top of the highest thing he has ever climbed, looking down at the only person who ever held the ladder steady and being asked now to climb the rest alone. He sat with the cold knot of it, the way Merlin had taught him to sit with the heavy things, and he did not chase it out, and he did not let it choose for him. And when he had been still around it long enough to hear his own self under it, he found that the self underneath had already decided, and had decided some time ago, perhaps on the day of the pebble, perhaps on the first night by the kind chair, and that all the trembling was doing was making the deciding loud. If I don't, he said slowly, working it out aloud as he worked everything out, then it was all for nothing. You waited 1,000 years and the door picked me and you taught me everything and you gave me a chair that fit, and if I say no because I can't stand the thought of being alone, then the thing down there wins without even getting out, because the whole reason it can't open the door is that it only ever thinks about what it wants. And I'd be doing that. I'd be keeping you because I want you. Which is the one thing the magic can't do. He looked up and his eyes were wet, and he did not pretend they were not, because the air kept things and he had stopped lying to it long ago. So yes, I'll take it, not because the dark ahead is small, it isn't, and I won't pretend it is. Because you taught me that giving is the only thing that's really yours, and you're giving me everything, and the only way to not waste it is to take it and give it back to the world the way you would have. I want to, freely. Open hand, Merlin looked at him for a long moment, and the dim light of him was steady, and then the greatest wizard who ever lived bowed his head to a 7-year-old in a torn shirt, the deep slow bow of a king laying down a crown he has carried too long into hands he has at last found worthy, and said, "Then it is done, and well done, and I go willingly," which is more than I ever thought to say. Come, stand in the center of the hall where the light pools. And do the one thing you do better than any soul I have known in 1,000 years. Hold still, and open your hand, and want nothing, and let me give. So Harry stood in the center of the great hall under the drifting moats on the black glass floor, and he made himself deep water, and he opened his empty hands, and he wanted nothing. And Merlin rose from the chair of pale roots for the last time, and the chair sank back into the floor behind him, its work finished, and the old letter walked to the child across 1,000 years and laid his hands of light over Harry's hands of flesh and began to pour. It did not look like power. The chronicler, who has described a great many grand workings and will describe one more before the end, insists on this. The inheritance of Merlin did not look like lightning, or fire, or any of the loud things the wand folk make when they wish to be seen making them. It looked like dawn. It came slow and it came warm, and it came from the dimming figure of the old man into the still figure of the child, the way light comes up over a long horizon, not arriving from anywhere, simply ceasing to be absent. And as it came, the hall told the story of it on the walls, the long carving running with the pouring light, the stags and the wolves in the towers, 1,000 years of told tale flowing out of the stone and into the child who would carry it now, until the walls themselves dimmed as the figure dimmed, giving up their brightness to the one small vessel standing open in the middle of the world. Harry felt it come. He felt the old art settle into him not as a weight but as a depth, a sudden vast downward room under the floor of himself, the way a child standing in a doorway feels behind the one lit room he knows, the dark enormous house he has never been allowed into, and that is, he learns in that instant, his has always been his, every shrouded chamber of it. He felt the names of things he had never been taught arrive, complete, the way a remembered word arrives. He felt 1,000 years of someone else's careful, bitter, generous love for the world pour in and become, without ceasing to be Merlin's, also his, the way a language becomes yours though every word in it was made by the dead. And he felt, threaded all through it, the warning Merlin had built into the very gift, the lived knowledge of the flaw, the corner kept back, the price unpaid, so that Harry would carry not only the art but the precise shape of the mistake he must not repeat. And at the heart of it, when the pouring was nearly done, Merlin gave him the last thing, the small physical thing, pressing it into Harry's open palm with the final substance of his fading hands. A stone, not the gray pebble that was light now among the motes. This was pale and smooth and warm, the color of the inside of a shell, and Harry knew it the instant it touched him because he had stood before it set into the rim of the door on his first night in the world below. The keystone, the hollow key. The one loose piece the makers had left, the receipt of the whole binding, the heart of the lock that opened to the empty hand. "It is yours now," said Merlin, and his voice was very faint and the hall was very dark, only one lamp left alight upon the wheel, only the faintest outline left of the old man of light, a letter read down to its signature. "The hill will answer to it and to you and to no other until you give it freely to whoever the door chooses after you. 1,000 years hence or 7, the door keeps its own counsel. You are the heir of Merlin, Harry Potter, not of my power. Power is the wand folk's word and they are welcome to it, of my watch, of my unfinished work, of the open hand. Carry it better than I did, give the last coin when the hour asks. And know in the dark that is coming that you were chosen not because you were great, but because you were good, and that the two are not the same, and that the world has always, always confused them, and that you, child, are the proof of the difference." The last light gathered and steadied and was, at the very end, faintly, unmistakably warm. "You have surpassed me, child, which is the only success a teacher should ever pray for. Go on now. I have 1,000 years of being needed to set down, and I find I should like to set it down looking at the one person who made the waiting worth it." And the last lamp on the wheel went out. A second bell rang across Britain that day, and the wise old man in the north felt it in his teeth, and the grasping man in the White House felt it in his ledgers, and both of them understood, each in his own grammar, that the thing they had been circling had changed hands. For the inheritance of Merlin did not pass quietly. It could not. 1,000 years of the old art moving from one vessel to another sang out across every instrument keyed to the hollow, and the gray stone under glass at the top of the tower rang a new note, a note Albus Dumbledore had never heard and recognized instantly, the note of a watch being handed on. He stood before the case a long while. Then he went to find the heir because the heir was now, beyond any further pretending, the most important person in Britain, and Albus Dumbledore had spent his life making certain that the most important person in Britain was someone he could reach. Harry came up the stair into a grey morning with the key warm in his pocket and 1,000 years folded quiet under the floor of himself, and the green world was waiting for him again, and this time there were 3 of them at the fence. He had changed, and they saw it, though none of them could have said how. He was the same small child in the same poor clothes. He had not grown an inch nor aged a day, for the hill kept its own time, and he was 7 still, and would be 7 a while yet. But he came up the slope without hurrying, and he stood among the great wizards of his age without making himself small, and when he looked at them, he looked the way the door looked, weighing not their faces but the wanting under their faces. And Dumbledore, who missed nothing, saw the change and named it correctly to himself, and the naming was the nearest thing to a wound he allowed himself that morning, because the change meant the child was now, truly and finally, beyond shaping. "Harry," said Dumbledore gently. "Something has happened, something has ended beneath that hill, and something has passed to you. I felt it. I have spent 90 years learning to feel exactly that, and I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. You carry now what Merlin carried. You are very young to carry it, and the thing it was meant to guard against is very near to waking, and I have come to offer you, plainly and without the staircase I built for you last time, my help." "I'm listening," said Harry, and he was deep water watching the table. "Come to Hogwarts," said Dumbledore. "Not in 4 years now. Let the school become your home and your shield. Let me place the Hollow under the protection of wards that have held for 1,000 years against everything but Merlin's own door. Let the few people in the world who can be trusted with this stand between you and what is coming, so that a child of 7 is not the last wall of Britain. I am not asking to take what you carry. I could not. The door has seen to that, and I find I am old enough at last to be easy that the door has seen to it. I am asking to help you carry it. That is all. That is, I promise you all." And it was a good offer, and most of it was true, and Harry stood in the grey morning and did the thing Merlin had given his death to teach him, which was to watch what would grow smaller if he said yes. He saw it at once now, with the old art quiet behind his eyes, that if he went to Hogwarts under Dumbledore's roof, behind Dumbledore's wards, advised by Dumbledore's chosen few, then the hill would still answer only to Harry's hand, but Harry's hand would answer more and more gently and lovingly, and for the best of reasons, to Dumbledore. That the key in his pocket would stay his, but the choices about the key would migrate, one reasonable step at a time, into older and wiser keeping. That the protection was real, and the protection was a cup, and under the cup, exactly where it always was, sat the quiet and permanent transfer of the one thing Dumbledore had organized his whole soul around, never leaving in lesser hands, which was the deciding. "You really do believe it," Harry said, and the understanding arrived in him slowly. "Every word. That's the part Merlin said I'd find hardest, and he was right. You're not lying. You think helping me and keeping me are the same thing, because for you they've always been the same thing." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not coming to Hogwarts now, not because you'd hurt me, because you'd save me, and saving me is how you'd keep me, and I've already had one person give me everything and want nothing back, and I know the difference now all the way down, and I can't unknow it. You'd want something back, you wouldn't even mean to. It would just happen the way it always happens, one kind step at a time, until the heir of Merlin made every choice by asking what the headmaster would think. He met the blue eyes and held them, and there was no cruelty in him, only the terrible clear sight of a child taught by the dead. "I'll be your friend if you'll let me. I won't be your peace." The field was very still. Crouch, who did not understand half of what had passed, but understood a refusal of authority when he heard one, opened his mouth, and Lucius Malfoy, who understood all of it and had been waiting with the patience of a snake for the schoolmaster's grand offer to fail, stepped smoothly into the silence to make his own. "How very moving," said Lucius, "and how very convenient for the child to have learned from a 1,000-year-old corpse precisely the speech that frees him from every adult who might govern him. But sentiment, headmaster, is not law, and the child's charming independence is not, alas, his to declare." He drew from inside his immaculate robes a scroll heavy with the wax of the ministry, and unrolled it with the unhurried calm of a man laying down the winning card he has held all evening. "A writ of requisition, signed this morning, placing the site known as the Hollow, and any objects or persons essential to its safe management, under the protective custody of a special committee of the Wisengamot, of which I have the honor to be chairman. The thing beneath that hill is a danger to every witch and wizard in Britain. The ministry cannot leave its only key in the pocket of an unschooled muggle-raised child. The child will be taken into care, the appropriate care, and the key with him, and it will all be quite legal and quite gentle and quite final." He let the scroll hang in the air, and the ministry's wax caught the grey light, and Crouch shifted, because the writ bore real signatures, and Crouch worshipped real signatures even when he distrusted the hand that gathered them. And for a moment the law of the green world stood arrayed against a 7-year-old in a torn shirt, and it was a great deal of law. Chairman Malfoy, said a dry voice from low down, files an interesting document, and Carrick was there, having come up the Forge Road in the night and waited, as goblins wait, for the exact moment his presence would cost the enemy the most. I have one too. He produced the writ of the compact, the pale unalterable metal, and held the two scrolls side by side, the wizard wax and the goblin steel, and the comparison did not flatter the wax. Your Wisengamot may requisition a great many things, my lord. It may not requisition a friend of the goblin nation, sealed in a compact older than your ministry by 9 centuries, without breaching a treaty your government has spent 400 years too sensible to breach. Take the child by your writ, and you do not gain a key. You gain a war, and a goblin war is not fought with scrolls, and it does not end at your throat, it ends at your vaults, and I have read your account, Chairman, every careless line of it, and I promise you that you cannot afford me. A treaty, said Lucius, the silk going thin, that no living wizard has ratified, requires no ratification, said Carrick, being sealed in blood, which does not lapse, unlike I observe your composure. And then Harry did a small thing, and it was the thing that ended the matter, and it was not a blow and not a threat, because he was the heir of Merlin, and the heir of Merlin did not threaten. He simply opened his hand, the empty asking hand, palm up, the way the door's carving opened its hand. And into it freely from the grey morning, from the cold air, from the patient ground that had known him a year, he called light, not the wan folks' harsh conjured light, but the silver light of the old art, the light of the hall below, and it pooled in his small palm and rose and hung over the field, cool and constant and entirely impossible. And the 3 great wizards looked at a 7-year-old holding a piece of the morning in his open hand the way no one in 1,000 years had held it, and understood. Each in his own grammar that whatever was written on whatever scroll, this was not a child who could be taken into care like a parcel, because the thing he carried did not answer to custody, it answered to him, and it would not come gently into any other hand, and to try would be to break the one tool that might save them all. Put away your writ, Lucius, said Dumbledore quietly, and the steel in him had turned for this one moment to stand between the heir and the snake, not because he had given up wanting Harry, but because a Malfoy with the heir was worse than a free heir, and even at his most calculating Albus Dumbledore knew the difference between a game lost and a game thrown to the enemy. The child is not yours. He is not, I have learned today, entirely mine. He is, it would appear, his own, and the goblins and Merlins and Britain will simply have to hope that those are better keepers than a committee. Go home, you have lost this one. Do try to lose it gracefully, it is a skill you will need. Lucius Malfoy looked at the silver light in the child's hand and at the goblin steel, and at the schoolmaster who had turned against him, and he rolled up his useless scroll with hands that betrayed nothing, and he smiled, which was worse than any scowl, because Lucius smiling was Lucius deciding to win later. And he made his courtesies, and he withdrew to his soundless carriage, and the chronicler must report that as he went he gave one quiet order to figure waiting at the edge of the waste ground, a curse-breaker in working leathers who had been idle a fortnight and was owed his fee, and the order was short, and the order was spiteful, and the order was the single most catastrophic sentence spoken in Britain that year, and it was this: that since the heir and the goblins between them had cost him the prize should be cost to everyone, that the breakers were to go down that night, treaty be damned, and force the seal and take whatever lay behind it before the law could close, and if they could not take it, why then they should crack it and let the famous heir of Merlin try to manage what came out. He did not believe anything would come out. That was the thing about greed. It could not imagine a hunger larger than its own. Harry went back down into a hall that had gone dark. It was the first thing the old art could not soften, the absence. The drifting motes were gone, the carved walls stood unlit and silent, the chair of pale roots had sunk back into the floor and left no mark, and where for a year there had been a warm voice in a country of lines and a light that laughed at lost shoes, there was now only black glass and quiet and the cold patient pressure from below. Harry stood in the middle of it, the key warm in his hand, the inheritance vast and wordless under the floor of himself, and he did the only thing there was to do, which was the thing he had been taught. He was still around the heaviness, and he let it be heavy, and he did not pretend the dark was anything but dark. He went to the place where the chair had been, and he sat down on the bare floor in the exact spot, and for a little while the heir of Merlin was simply a 7-year-old sitting where a friend used to sit, and the chronicler will leave him that little while in privacy, because some things are not for telling, only for keeping. Carrick let him have it. The goblin stood at the foot of the stair with his blade across his knees and his eyes on the dark below, and he did not offer comfort, which would have been a lie, and he did not hurry the child, which would have been a theft, and when Harry at last rose and came to stand beside him at the head of the deep, Carrick said only, he gave well. The best of them give well at the last, and it does not make the room less dark, and you must not let anyone tell you it should. Now, we have work, and the work will not wait, and that is the one mercy of work. Will you stay? Harry asked, not because of the compact, because he stopped, because he had learned not to want things at people, and asking Carrick to stay was a wanting, and he looked away as he said it. The goblin looked up at him, and the dry old face did something it had not done in 400 years of dusting a debt. It softened all the way for one whole moment and did not look away. The compact says I am owed to you, said Carrick. It does not say I must like it. I find I like it. That is not in the ledger. I shall put it there myself in my own hand, the eighth keeper's single act of sentiment, and let my successors make of it what they will. Yes, heir of Merlin, I will stay, not for the debt. For the child who keeps a clean ward and gives away his only stone and asks a goblin to stay because he wants him to and is decent enough to look at his boots while he says it. I have served the nation 400 years and met perhaps 3 souls worth the standing beside. You are the third. Now stop wanting things at me. It is undignified in an heir, and we have a seal to mind. And as if the deep had been waiting for the company to be complete before it struck, the seal broke. It came as it had come before, but 1,000-fold. The long fibrous parting of a great knot giving up not one turn, but all of them at once, far below, where the curse-breaker's borrowed force had found the flaw that a fortnight of digging and 1,000 years of pulling had prepared and laned. And the freely given binding that could not be broken by taking was, at the last, pried apart by the only thing that had ever been able to pry it, which was a wanting reckless enough to crack the cage without caring what slept inside. Above in the green night, Lucius Malfoy's breakers felt the hills shudder under their levers and ran, as Dudley's gang had once run, and were luckier than they deserved, and lived. Below in the dark beneath the dark, the pale lattice of the seal, the shell-colored metal and the threaded silver and the poured-in lives of a king and a wizard and a great many braver people, came apart with a sound like the world drawing one enormous breath. And the cold that had only ever reached a finger through a wound came up the deep stair entire, no longer a finger, no longer gentle, no longer pretending, the whole vast starved patience of the ever-wanting rising at last out of the cage of gifts toward the warm and living world it had been promised, 1,000 years late, by the greed of a man who could not imagine a hunger larger than his own. The hall woke to meet it. Harry felt it before he saw it, the inheritance under the floor of himself stirring, recognizing, answering, 1,000 years of the old art rising in him the way the tide had once risen on the hill, but ordered now, named now, his. He raised the key, and he did not will it, he asked, and the hill answered. All down the dark hall the suits of green metal armor that had turned their empty visors toward him on his first night came off their stands with the slow grinding dignity of guardians who have slept 1,000 years against exactly this hour, and stood and turned and faced the rising cold, the old watch of Caerwither mustering for the last time at the lifting of its true heir's hand. They were terrible to look upon, the guardians of Caerwither, and Harry made himself look. 12 of them he counted, one for each lamp of the wheel, and they did not move the way armor moves in the wan folks' wild tales, clanking and blind. They moved like patience-given limbs, slow and certain and wholly awake, and as each came off its stand it turned its empty visor toward Harry and bowed its great green head, the salute of the watch to the one whose hand had woken it. He felt them in the inheritance, as he felt everything now, their names and their long sleep in the single unbroken promise they had been built to keep, which was the promise the stone kept and the door kept and the seal had kept until this night, to stand between the hunger and the world freely, asking nothing back. He might have been swallowed up by it. A year earlier he would have been. A year earlier he had been a child at a dead tree with 5 boys against him and nothing whatever in his hands. But the months had changed the arithmetic of him, and he stood at the head of the deep with the guardians ranking behind and the goblins steady at his side, and he found that the old art did not make him feel large. It made him feel held the way the chair had held him, the way the hill had held its secret, the way 1,000 years of the dead had held the line so that one living child might inherit it, and being held he could hold in his turn, which was, he understood at last, the whole of what the inheritance had ever been for, not to make him a weapon, to make him a wall that gave instead of struck. Caerwither, he said, and he did not know where the word had come from until he felt it rise out of the inheritance, the hill's true name, the fortress of glass, spoken aloud by its heir for the first time in 1,000 years. And the guardians straightened at the sound of it, and the silver fire stood up tall upon the hearth, and the whole dark hall rang once softly like a struck bell, in answer to the child who had learned its name. Hold the hall behind me. Whatever climbs out of the deep, it does not get past you to the green world. That is the watch. I am going down to do the other thing. The cold hearth, swept and laid with its white logs, kindled of its own accord into silver fire as Harry passed it, and the carved walls woke and ran with light, the stags and the wolves and the falling towers, the whole long story blazing back into motion to witness its own final chapter. And at the head of the deep stair stood a goblin with a bared blade, and a hall full of waking guardians, and a 7-year-old boy in a torn shirt with a piece of the morning in one hand and the key to the underneath of the world in the other. and below them the dark opened, and out of it, climbing, came the thing that the door had been built, 1,000 years and one buried stair ago, to find the answer to. Harry looked down the stair into the rising cold, and he did not run, because there was nowhere left below the bottom of the world to run to, and because running was not any more the thing he did. He had come down this hill once as a hunted child with nothing in his hands. He went down it now as the heir of Merlin with everything in his hands, and the difference, the chronicler thinks, was not the power and not the key, and not the waking guardians at his back. The difference was that the first time the dark had been waiting for him, and this time he was the one who had decided to go and meet it. "Stay close, keeper," said Harry Potter to the one friend who had chosen him. "I think I finally understand what the door was for." And he set his empty hand against the cold and started down. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, what the door was for the stair down to the deep had no count. Harry had counted the first stair, the 33 steps from the green world into the hall of black glass, because counting was the thing his hands did when there was nothing else to hold. But this stair, the one that wound past the lowest gallery and down into the dark beneath the dark, refused to be counted, the steps coming faster than number or slower or both, so that to set a foot upon them was to step out of the arithmetic of the world entirely and into the older mathematics of the thing that waited below, which knew only one operation, and that operation was more. He went down it anyway, with the key warm in one hand and a goblin's tread steady at his shoulder, and behind and above them the 12 guardians of Caerwither closed ranks across the mouth of the great hall, a wall of waking green metal between the deep and the door, between the hunger and the soft green world that did not know how near it slept to being eaten. The silver fire burned tall on the hearth at their backs. The carved walls blazed with the whole long story, running now toward its final panel, the one no carver had been able to finish because the ending had not yet happened, a stretch of blank stone waiting at the end of 1,000 years of told tale for whatever Harry Potter was about to write on it with his life. The cold came up to meet them, and it was not a finger now, and it was not a voice pretending to be kind. It was the broken cage pouring out its prisoner. The pale lattice that the goblins had forged and Merlin had spent his life to set lay shattered along the floor of the deep, the shell-colored metal cracked, the threaded silver gone dark, the freely given binding pried apart at last by a greed reckless enough to break what it could not steal. And rising up out of the wreck of it, unfolding into the vast cold dark the way smoke unfolds, the way a stain spreads, the way the worst news you have ever received unfolds in the seconds after you understand it, came Morgan Le Fay. She had a shape. That was the first wrongness and the deepest, and Harry made himself look at it the way Merlin had taught him to look at heavy things, without flinching and without pretending. She had a shape, and the shape was a woman, tall and terrible and beautiful in the way that a drowning is beautiful when you are too far off to help, robed in something that was not cloth but absence, crowned in something that was not metal but the idea of a crown, the want of one. And her face, when it turned its attention upon the small warm point of him at the foot of the unnumbered stair, was the most starved thing in all the world, a hollow that no amount of anything had ever filled or ever could, 2 eyes like the inside of an empty cup held up year after year to a sky that never once consented to rain. "Heir," she said, and her voice was the green world's most beautiful voice, the voice of everyone who had ever been about to love you and then at the last moment changed their mind. "Little open hand, you came down to me after all. They told you I was a monster, the dead one and the gold one and the gilt-tongued accountant at your shoulder. And you came anyway because you, alone of all of them, know what it is to be the thing locked in the dark while the world eats well above your head. We are the same, you and I have waited 1,000 years to meet the only soul in creation who could understand me, and here you are, and you are 7, and you are hungry, and oh child, I can see it on you, you're so very hungry, no matter what the dead man poured into you to cover it over." "I'm not hungry," said Harry. "I had goblin bread." It was such a small and true and 7-year-old thing to say into the teeth of the operatic dark that Carrick, beside him, made a sound that in a goblin passes for a laugh, and the rising cold checked fractionally, the way a thing checks that has prepared a grand speech and been answered by a child declining to play its part. "You make jokes," said Morgan Le Fay, and the beauty of the voice thinned, and something underneath it showed through, the appetite, the floor of the cup. "They all make jokes, the brave ones at the end when they have nothing left. I have eaten a great many brave jokes. I will give you a truer one. You think the dead man saved you. You think his hall and his lessons and his pretty silver fire were a gift. They were a cage, child, exactly like mine, only yours had a kinder light in it. He took a hunted, starving boy and he poured 1,000 years of duty into him and he died and left you the bill and he called it love, the way they always call it love when they have a use for you. I at least am honest about my hunger." He dressed his in a chair that fit. The cup eyes fixed on Harry and the cold reached, gentle, terrible, around the edges of the guardian's wall. "Let me out and I will never use you. I will only give your mother's face, your father's voice, the childhood they stole. Everything, child, everything you were ever refused, I will pour into you until the hole is full, and you will never be hungry again, and all it costs is a single word from the only hand that can open the last door. One word, say yes. And Harry stood at the bottom of the world and felt the pull of it, the awful exact pull, because she had found, the way the herald had found, the precise shape of every want he had ever carried up and down a stair. And he understood, standing in the pull, that this was the trial, that everything since the chase across the waste ground had been leading here, to a starved and beautiful thing offering a starved and ordinary boy the one bargain the whole of his life had prepared him to accept. He thought about the cups, he thought about watching the table and not the hands. And he looked with the old art quiet behind his eyes, not at the gift she was holding up so that it filled his whole vision, but at the thing underneath it, the thing she was not showing, the thing that moved while the gift held his attention. And what moved underneath, what had always moved underneath, was the wanting. She was not offering to fill his hole, she was offering to make him into another mouth. No, said Harry. The word was very small, and it was the largest thing that had been said in the deep in 1,000 years, and Morgan Le Fay heard in it the one sound she had never learned to eat, which was a hand closing not in greed but in refusal, an open hand choosing freely to give her nothing. And the beauty went out of her all at once, the way warmth goes out of a corpse, and what was left was the hunger with the woman peeled off it, and it came up the unnumbered stair to take by force the thing it had failed to charm. It is the chronicler's grim duty to record that the first part of the battle went exactly as 1,000 years of legend would have predicted, which is to say magnificently and uselessly. The guardians of Caerwither met the rising cold at the mouth of the great hall, 12 waking statues of green metal that had slept since the age of kings, and they were glorious, and they fought the way the old watch was built to fight, not striking but holding, locking their ranks into a wall of patient promise across the dark. And the hunger broke upon them like a winter sea, and for a while the wall held, and Harry dared to think a wall might be enough. It was not enough. Nothing that only holds is ever, in the end, enough against a thing that only takes, because holding spends and taking feeds, and the arithmetic runs one way. Harry watched the leftmost guardian go. The cold found the seam of its 1,000-year promise and pulled, the way it had pulled at the seal, the way it pulled at everything, and the green light that was the guardian's waking dimmed and guttered and went out, and the empty armor stood one moment longer out of habit and then fell, ringing to the black glass, a watchfire snuffed. 11. The hunger drank what it had taken and grew by exactly that much colder. They did not break, the 11 that remained, and the chronicler will set their stand down though no monument marks it and no song remembers it, because someone ought to. They had kept watch in the dark 1,000 years against an hour they were built knowing they could not survive, and when the hour came they met it without one backward step, 11 statues of green metal locking their ranks across the mouth of the hall while the world they had never seen slept on above them, ignorant and safe and worth it. The second to fall took the cold full upon itself to spare the line, and went down with its empty gauntlet still spread in the gesture of holding, and the gesture held even as the light went out of it. The third and the fourth fell together, shoulder to shoulder, the way the oldest friends go. And still the 7 that were left drew in and closed the gap and held, and the hunger broke upon them and could not pass, not yet, not while one of them still stood, because the old watch of Caerwither did not know how to do anything but stand, and would not learn it now. Harry watched them spend themselves to buy him heartbeats, and he understood, with the cold clarity the deep gave to everything, that they were buying the heartbeats for a reason. A wall of the bravest metal in Britain was dying one guardian at a time to purchase him the single commodity the whole hill had ever traded in, which was time, and they were not buying it so that he might strike harder, for he had tried striking and it had fed her, and they were not buying it so that he might hold longer, for holding was only a slower dying. They were buying it so that he could think. So that the one hand the door had spent 1,000 years searching the green world to find might work out, before the last of them went down, what the door had been for. The guardians could not end her, the goblin could not end her, the dead man had not ended her. All of them across 1,000 years had only ever held the line and waited for the hand, and the hand was here at last, and it was running out of wall to think behind. Harry did the thing he had been raised to do. He raised the key and he reached down into the vast dark room of the inheritance under the floor of himself. The 1,000 years Merlin had poured into him, and he warded the failing line, through a boundary of the old art across the breach where the guardian had fallen, a promise of stone and silver, warmth in and cold out. The grandest ward he had ever made cleanly, made by asking, the whole of his hard-won art set against the rising dark. It held for 10 heartbeats. Then the hunger leaned on it, not with force the ward could have refused, but with want, with the bottomless patient pull that was the one thing the old art had no answer for, because the old art was made of giving, and you cannot give to a thing whose entire nature is the inability to be given to. And Harry felt his clean grand ward begin at its edges to be eaten, the warmth he had set in it draining out into the cold the way heat drains from an open hand, and he understood with the part of him that watched tables that he had made the same mistake the whole world had been making for 1,000 years. He was trying to hold a hunger. You cannot hold a hunger. You can only feed it or end it, and everything he knew how to do, ward and name and guardian and goblin steel, was in the end only a way of feeding it slowly instead of fast. Carrick proved it, because Carrick was a goblin and goblins do not stand idle while a wall comes down. He went past the failing guardians with his blade of goblin make, the blade that had ended things no wizard could name, and he struck at the heart of the rising cold, one clean terrible blow with the whole honor of his nation behind it. And the chronicler will tell you that the blade bit, that for one instant the hunger recoiled around a wound of true goblin steel, and that it was the bravest and most useless thing Harry ever saw, because a wound is a thing taken, and the ever-wanting ate the wound, ate the blow, ate the very strength of the striking and grew, and flung the keeper of the deep records the length of the hall to crash against the base of the cold hearth and lie still. Carrick. Harry's grand ward broke when his attention broke, the way the first ward had broken on the practice floor a year and a lifetime ago, and the cold poured through the breach into the great hall, and the silver fire on the hearth shrank low, and 3 more guardians guttered and fell in the space of as many breaths, and the unfinished panel on the wall waited blank, for an ending that was beginning to look very much like the oldest ending there is. The goblin was not dead. He stirred against the hearth, one hard hand finding the stone, and he lifted his head, and across the failing hall he met Harry's eyes, and he did not say run, because he had read the compact and he knew there was nowhere below the bottom of the world to run to, and he did not say fight, because he had just proven with his own body that fighting fed the thing. He said the only useful thing a dying watch can say to its heir, the thing Merlin had spent his whole death trying to teach and had in the end been unable to do, because Merlin had never managed it himself. The other thing, Carrick rasped, blood on his teeth, honor in his eyes. Whatever it is, now, there is no more striking left in either of us, child, do the other thing. And Harry Potter, 7 years old, alone at the bottom of the world with the guardians falling and the goblin down and the cold at his throat and 1,000 years of someone else's art guttering in him like the last lamps on the wheel, stopped trying to hold the dark and stopped trying to strike it and stood very still in the middle of the ending, and asked himself the only question that had ever once gotten him anywhere, which was the question the cups had taught him. Not what is everyone looking at, but what is moving while they look, and he saw it. He saw it as he had seen the smudge on the glass under the cup, the dull plain truth that the whole gorgeous performance had labored to keep him from noticing, that the hunger rising to eat the world was not underneath a hunger at all, it was a hole. It was the exact shape of a thing that had been wanting something for so long that the wanting had grown over the want, the way bark grows over a wound until you cannot find the cut, only the scar that the whole tree has become. Morgan Le Fay had been a starved, clever girl in a world that praised her and fed her brothers and gave her, to a soul as vast as any king's, precisely nothing, and the nothing had not made her greedy, not at first. The nothing had made her hungry, which is different, and no one had ever once in all her long, brilliant, ruined life given her anything freely, expecting nothing back. Everyone had only ever wanted from her, or shrank from her, or at the very end bound her, which is only judgment given armor. Merlin had caged the hunger, he had never given it a single thing. He had stood at the mouth of the cave with the star held up in a hand with one finger curled, and he had held the dark and held it for 1,000 years, and the holding had kept it alive, because you cannot end a wanting by refusing it. You can only end a wanting by filling it, and there was only one thing in all of creation that could fill a hole that shape, and it was not more. It was a gift. Harry understood then the whole of what the door had been for, the thing he had told Carrick at the head of the stair that he was only beginning to grasp. The door opened to the empty hand, because the empty hand was the only hand that could do this. Every king and conqueror and clever grasping soul that had been turned away for 1,000 years had been turned away, because the cure for the ever-wanting could never be administered by anyone who wanted. The moment you wanted to defeat her, to be the hero, to win, you became another mouth, and the hunger ate you, the way it had eaten the brave jokes and the goblin's blow and the falling guardians. The only being who could end Morgan Le Fay was a being capable of giving her something freely, with no wish to be repaid, not even with her defeat. The door had spent 1,000 years looking for a hand empty enough to hold a gift for the hungriest thing in the world, and it had found one holding nothing, missing a shoe. So Harry did the other thing. He did not raise the key as a weapon. He did not throw the inheritance like a spear. He opened his hand, the empty asking hand, the open hand the door had loved, palm up, the way the carving held its star, only with no finger curled, not one, the whole hand open at last in the gesture Merlin's stone hand could not quite make. And into that open hand he gathered everything he had, which was a very great deal now, the 1,000 years of the old art, Merlin's whole poured-out self, the warmth the kind chair had taught him to build, the rules he had bled for, the home the hill had been, all of it, the entire inheritance of the greatest wizard who ever lived, and he did not use it. He gave it to her, to the starved girl under the hunger. freely expecting nothing, not even her ending, knowing she might simply eat it and him with it, giving it anyway because the giving was the only thing that had ever been truly his, and he would not at the last curl the finger. And he said the thing, the true thing, the thing no one had said to Morgan Le Fay in 1,000 years, the thing he had needed someone to say to a hunted boy in a cupboard, and that no one ever had until an old man of light said it at the bottom of a hill. He looked at the hole that was eating the world, and something in him broke open for it freely, the one clean grief of his whole guarded life spent on the last soul in creation who deserved it least and needed it most, and he said, "You should have been given things too. It wasn't fair. No one should be that hungry. Here, it's yours. You don't have to take it. I'm giving it." And the ever-wanting, which had eaten armies and ages and the bravest hearts of 1,000 years, which had never in all that time been given a single thing it had not been made to seize, received for the first and last time a gift. The chronicler does not have words for what happened then, and will not insult the moment by pretending to. There was a stillness. It came down into the deep the way Harry's stillness had come, the first thing Merlin ever taught him, the stillness of deep water, only vast now, vast as the dark, vast as the hunger it was filling. For in the instant the gift arrived, freely asking nothing, the hole that Morgan Le Fay had become was, for one whole impossible breath, full, and a thing that is full does not want. And the ever-wanting, with nothing left to want, with its single fuel gone out, with the wound under the bark finally, after 1,000 years, attended to, simply, quietly, like a held breath let go, stopped. The shape of the woman came back, for a moment, at the very end. The cold drew in from the failing hall, away from the fallen guardians and the down goblin and the shrinking fire, gathered itself back into the tall, terrible, beautiful figure at the foot of the broken seal, and the cup eyes that had held themselves up empty to an unraining sky for 1,000 years looked at the small boy who had filled them. And the starved girl looked out of the hunger one last time, and she was not a monster, and she had never quite been one. And what crossed the ruined country of that face the chronicler will not name, because Harry named it for both of them gently in the only word that fit, and the word was enough, and she went not eaten, not struck down, not caged, given to and filled and let go, the way you lay something down that finally, after far too long, can rest. The deep, when she had gone, was simply quiet. Harry had expected, if he had expected anything, that he would have to do something more, that there would be a binding to set, a seal to weld, a last working to hold the dark down the way Merlin had held it for 1,000 years. There was not. That was the thing Merlin had never understood, the thing his own flinching had hidden from him at the very end. The dark had never needed binding. The dark had needed ending, and an ending, unlike a binding, does not have to be maintained. There was nothing left below the bottom of the world to cage. The hole that had been Morgan Le Fay was filled, and a filled hole is not a hole, it is only ground, and the broken lattice of the old seal lay quiet on the floor of the deep, its long watch over, a cage with nothing left to keep, and the cold did not rise because there was no longer anything cold to rise, and the great enemy that the door had been built to find the answer to was not defeated, and was not destroyed, and was, in the only word that had ever fit her, at last at rest. It had cost him everything, exactly as Merlin had warned, only not in the way Merlin had expected. Harry knelt on the black glass at the foot of the unnumbered stair and felt the vast downward room of the inheritance under the floor of himself empty out, the 1,000 years draining away where he had given it, the names and the grammar and the poured-out self of the greatest wizard who ever lived going out of him into the ending, freely, holding nothing back, because the gift had been the whole of it, and a gift kept back is no gift at all. He let it go. He did not curl the finger. And as the last of the old art left him, he felt, for one moment, threaded all through the leaving, something that was not his and had never quite been his, the lived warmth of a 1,000-year love for a world the dead man had spent himself to save. And it was, the chronicler will dare to say, at peace, the way a debt long carried comes to peace when it is paid in full. For in giving the inheritance away freely, Harry had done the one thing Merlin could not, and the corner of Merlin that had been kept back 1,000 years ago, the withheld coin, the curled finger, went out of the world at last in the open hand of a child, spent entirely, and was, after a very long time, finally and completely done. Then it was gone, all of it, and Harry was only Harry, 7 years old and emptied to the floor of himself, with nothing left of the old art but the few plain rules he had bled for on the practice floor, which had always been his, found and not given, and which stayed, the way a ward stays. He had come down the hill a year ago with nothing in his hands. He knelt at the bottom of it now with nothing in his hands again, and the nothing was different. The chronicler must insist on this. It was the most different nothing in the world, because the first nothing had been the nothing of a boy who had never been allowed to hold anything. And this was the nothing of a person who had held the greatest thing there was and given it away on purpose, and between those two empty hands lies the whole distance a soul can travel. "Spent," said a rasping voice, not broken. "I did say there was a difference. Carrick had dragged himself up against the base of the cold hearth, blood dark on his teeth, one arm held wrong, and he was looking at Harry across the quiet hall with an expression that no goblin had worn in the memory of the shelf, and that the chronicler will simply call, and let the goblins object if they dare, regard. The silver fire had come back, low and steady, on the hearth beside him. Above them, along the walls, the surviving guardians of Caerwither stood down from their broken ranks, one by one, turning from the deep that no longer needed watching, and lowered their green heads and went still, their thousand-year watch fulfilled at last. And the fallen ones lay quiet where they had fallen, their lights out, their duty honorably and finally discharged, and no one would ever need to wake them again. And on the wall, the long carving, the great told tale of 1,000 years, ran one final time with light into the blank panel at the end that no carver had been able to finish. And the stone filled itself slowly with the only ending it had ever been waiting for, a small open hand, every finger uncurled, holding out a light to a hollow that was a hollow no longer. Harry crawled across the floor to the goblin, because his legs would not yet do anything so ambitious as carry him, and he sat down against the warm stone of the hearth beside his friend, and for a while the two of them, the spent child and the broken keeper, simply breathed in a hall gone quiet for the first time in 1,000 years, beside a fire that asked nothing and gave warmth. Under the finished story of how the hungriest thing in the world had been ended by the one hand empty enough to give it what it starved for. "Your bread," Harry said, eventually. "Have you got any more of your bread? I gave away an entire 1,000-year magical inheritance, and I think I'm going to be sick, and also I'm really, really hungry." And Carrick, keeper of the deep records, eighth of his name, laughed, the full goblin laugh this time, the one that frightens armies, blood on his teeth and his arm held wrong and his honor discharged to the letter. And he reached into his coat with his good hand, and he broke off a corner of the dark iron-end honey bread, and he put it into the open palm of the heir of Merlin, who was an heir of nothing now and the richest empty-handed soul in Britain, and he closed the small fingers round it. "Eat," he said. "It will not love you, but it will not lie to you either, and neither, child, will I, which is the highest thing one creature can promise another, and I am putting it in the ledger, and my successors may weep." They went up together in the end because neither of them could have managed it alone, the spent child and the broken goblin, each holding the other upright on the long climb out of the deep. And this, the chronicler thinks, is as fitting an image as the whole affair produced, that the great enemy of the age was answered by a gift, and the climb back to the light was managed by two friends who could not stand without each other, and that there is not, in the final accounting, so very much difference between the two. The great hall, when they reached it, had changed, the way a sick room changes when the long illness has finally broken. The guardians stood at rest along the walls, their visors lowered, their watch fulfilled. The silver fire burned low and easy. The drifting motes of light had thinned, not gone but lessened, the way a house dims its lamps when the family is at last going to bed after a very long night. Caerwither, the fortress of glass, the watchtower that had pointed 1,000 years downward at a danger that no longer existed, was becoming, at last, the thing the legends had always mistaken it for, a grave, a true one, a place where something could finally rest because its work was done. And the stair let them out into the green world at dawn. It was the strangest thing after all of it to come up through the parting turf and find Surrey exactly where he had left it. The rusted fence, the waste ground silver with dew, the low green mound with its lightning-killed hawthorn, and beyond, the sleeping roofs of Little Winging going pink at the edges as the sun came up on a morning that did not know, would never know, how close it had come to being the last one. A blackbird was already at it on a television aerial. Somewhere a milk float was beginning its stately rounds. The world had been saved at the bottom of a hill by a 7-year-old who had given away everything he owned, and the world responded by being, with magnificent indifference, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. Harry loved it for that. He had not known he would. He stood blinking in the wet dawn with the pale stone that had been the key, and was now only a stone, warm in his pocket, and he loved the blackbird and the milk float and the indifference, because the indifference meant it had worked. The soft green world would go on being soft and green and unaware, which was the entire point of standing between it and the dark, and the reward of the watch was that the watched would never have to know they had been watched. "You will be wondering," said a mild voice, "whether I am going to make this difficult." Albus Dumbledore was sitting on the upturned crate again, by the fence, in robes the color of the dawn, and he looked very old and very tired, and the half-moon spectacles were beaded with dew, and he had clearly been there all night, feeling in the fillings of his teeth and the place behind his breastbone. The largest working in 1,000 years run its course beneath the hill while he stood on the lid of it, locked out, able only to wait and to feel and to understand, far too late to manage any of it. Exactly what was happening below. "I felt it end," Dumbledore said. "The thing I have organized 90 years of my life around, I felt it simply end beneath my feet in the dark by a hand I could not reach, and I have been sitting here since trying to decide how I feel about being made after 90 years entirely unnecessary." He looked at Harry, and the blue eyes had no twinkle in them now, only the dew and the long sight. You gave it away, all of it. I can feel the absence of it on you the way one feels a cleared room. You had in your hands the whole inheritance of Merlin, the lost art, the greatest power in Britain, and you spent it freely, ending a thing instead of keeping a thing, and you kept nothing back, not one coin, which is precisely, child, the one thing I have never in my long and careful life been able to do. It was the nearest to a confession the chronicler ever heard from him, and he made it quietly to a 7-year-old in a wet field with no one to perform it for, which is the only setting in which Albus Dumbledore was ever entirely honest. I would have kept it. I want you to know that, so that you will know to watch me always for the rest of our long acquaintance. Had the door opened for me at 30, I would have taken the inheritance, and I would have used it wisely and well and for the greatest good, and I would never once have thought to simply give it away, and the thing in the dark would still be in the dark waiting, because I would have caged it as Merlin caged it, as I cage everything I love in order to keep it safe. You did not cage it. You gave it what it starved for and let it go. I am 120-odd years old, Harry Potter, and you have taught me something this morning, and I find that has not happened in rather a long time, and I find I do not entirely know what to do with the feeling. You could just say thank you, Harry suggested. A sound came out of Albus Dumbledore that the chronicler is fairly sure was a laugh rusty with long disuse. I could, he agreed. Thank you. There, I am informed it is good for the character. He rose then, unfolding to his great height against the pink sky, and for a moment the steel was visible in him again, the old habit of arrangement, the part that was already, the chronicler regrets to report, calculating how a child who could do what this child had done might be kept close, and watched, and gently, lovingly made his. And Harry saw it because Harry would always see it, and Dumbledore saw that Harry saw it, and something passed between them that would last for years, an understanding, a wariness, a strange respect, the opening move of a long game between a good man who could not stop arranging and a good child who could not be arranged. I will not press you to Hogwarts now. You have earned the right to be 7, which is a thing I took from you once and cannot give back, though I will spend what is left of me trying. But you will come when you are 11, because it is your school and your birthright, and because, whatever else I am the safest roof in Britain for a child the powerful will not stop wanting. And we will continue, you and I, this conversation about the difference between a lever and a gift, which you have begun this morning to win. He inclined his head, the small private salute. Until you are 11, then, do try to stay out of any further legends. They are terribly bad for the digestion. He was gone between one blink and the next, in the way of him. The matter of Lucius Malfoy the chronicler will dispatch briefly, because it dispatched itself. His curse breakers had cracked the seal, and the cracking was written in living gold in a goblin ledger 900 levels down, sealed in the blood of a king, and Carrick had filed before the dew dried. There was an inquiry. There was a great deal of restitution, calculated at compound interest by a keeper who enjoyed his work. There was a careful, expensive, humiliating season in which Lucius Malfoy explained, to a Wisengamot suddenly interested in his charitable concern for heritage, exactly why his hired men had been forcing a treaty-protected site on the night a 1,000-year danger nearly broke loose over Surrey. He survived it because men like Lucius survive, smiling, deciding to win later. But he did not come near the Green Hill again, and he did not speak the heir's name above a whisper, and when, years afterward, a dark and clever thing came back into the world looking for old allies and old hungers, Lucius Malfoy remembered in the marrow of him the morning a 7-year-old held a piece of the dawn in one open hand, and he was, for the rest of his life, just slightly more careful than his nature, which is the most that can be hoped of such men. Harry walked home through the waking streets in the pink light, in his torn shirt, with the pale stone in his pocket, the same way he had walked home a year ago in his one shoe, and the streets did not look at him, and that was, as it had always been, the strangest and safest thing about them. He let himself in through the back. The cupboard under the stairs was exactly as he had left it, dust and floor polish and the 9 nails in the ceiling, the longest of them bent into the shape of a question, and Harry lay down in it because he was 7 and he was tired, and there was, for now, nowhere else for the heir of nothing to go. But he was not alone in there, as he had not been alone since the night a door that could not be opened for a hunted child who had come to it holding nothing. He had a friend 900 levels under London who would not lie to him. He had a green hill that knew his hand and kept its long peace. He had the open hand itself, which was his now by right of having opened it all the way when it counted, and which no cupboard could ever close. And he had a pale stone, warm from his pocket, set carefully on the little shelf beside the bent nail, where no inspector ever came to count what a careful child kept. Above him, 3 full people slept the deep and dreamless sleep of the comfortably unaware. Below him, the whole turning earth held its ancient secrets, lighter now by one. And in between, in a cupboard the size of a coffin and the shape of a beginning, the child who had given away everything and kept the only thing that mattered looked up at his 9 nails in the gray dawn light, and found, when he looked, that the question-shaped one no longer seemed to be asking a question. It seemed at long last to be the answer. Chapter 7 End.